Townsend Press presents, from the Bluford series of books, Promises to Keep. Written by Paul Langan. Read by Jamil Gaines. Chapter 1. Come on, wake up. Tyray Hobbs opened his eyes and glanced at his clock. It was 5:03 a.m. He had been asleep for only a few hours. Was yesterday just a bad dream? He wondered. I said wake up, ordered Gil Hobbs, Tyray's father. He was standing in the bedroom doorway, already dressed in jeans and work boots, the same ones he wore every day on the job as a construction foreman. What for? It's early, Tyray replied. School ain't starting for hours. We ain't going to Bluford. You and me got something else to do first, his father barked. Tyray sat up and squinted at the hallway light that shined into his room. After what happened last night, he didn't want to get up or think about anything. Where are we going? We got to get that gun you left in the alley, Dad answered soberly. We can't leave it where some kids might pick it up. It's probably got your fingerprints all over it too, he grumbled. Don't need no cops hauling you away. One son is bad enough. Tyray winced at his father's words. He knew Dad was talking about Warren, his older brother, who had been dragged out of their house by the police over a year ago. He was arrested for armed robbery. Since then, Dad had become a bitter, quick-tempered man who yelled more than anything. Tyray knew he had given his father many reasons to yell, especially last night. Come on, move, Dad ordered. We gotta go. Tyray stumbled to the bathroom and shut the door. He froze at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were puffy and bloodshot. The cast that encased his left hand was stained with droplets of mud. A painful scab stretched just under his hairline. He looked terrible. The events of last night flooded through his mind like scenes from a nightmare. The cold heaviness of the gun in his hand. The terror in Darryl Mercer's eyes as Tyray's finger slid over the trigger. The final moment when, instead of at Darryl, he had pointed the gun at himself. Tyray shuddered. He turned on the water and splashed his face, trying to drive away the memories. 15 years old and nearly 6 feet tall, Tyray had spent his days as a freshman at Bluford High School tormenting Darryl, a new kid from Philadelphia. He had robbed him of his lunch money, tripped him in gym class, tossed him in a trash can at a school dance, and sent him home in tears more than once. But then one day, during lunch period 2 weeks ago, Darryl stood up to him. You ain't nothing but a bully, he had said. At first, Tyray didn't know what to do. None of the kids he had hassled since middle school ever challenged him. Broad and muscular for his age, Tyray had kept them too scared to do that, let alone snitch to a teacher. But Darryl was different. He had joined Bluford's wrestling team and had gradually become more popular at school. And when he spoke up in front of everyone, he said something else, words that stung each time Tyray remembered them. No one in this school likes you. They're just scared of you. But you know what? I ain't afraid of you no more. People whooped at the insult. Others rushed forward like hungry dogs that smelled blood. Fight! 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 Some yelled. A crowd quickly formed. It seemed everyone in the cafeteria was eager to see what would happen next. Tyray snapped. Every cell in his body was ready to destroy Darryl right there. He didn't care if he got suspended. Losing his reputation was far worse. But when he swung his fists at the smaller boy, it all went wrong. Darryl was quick. He dodged Tyray's punches. Then, in a flash, he used a wrestling move, lifting Tyray up and slamming him down on the rock-hard cafeteria floor. When Tyray landed, his left wrist snapped like a tree branch. He screamed in pain, clutching his hand. Some in the crowd nodded and smirked at him. A few even laughed. Principal Spencer gave Tyray a 3-day suspension for fighting. Afterward, he became a joke at school. People who used to join him in teasing Darryl now laughed at him. Others, including his old friend Rodney Banks, acted as if he didn't exist. That's when Tyray decided he needed a gun. "Come on, boy," Dad yelled from out in the hallway. "We ain't got all day." "I'll be out in a minute," Tyray hollered, quickly washing himself and rushing to his room to throw on some jeans and a black hoodie. Minutes later, Tyray sat in his father's noisy pickup, gazing out at Union Street. In the dreary gray dawn, the normally busy avenue looked deserted. Apartment windows were dark. Storefronts stood shuttered and empty. Some were hidden behind thick steel mesh that made them look like jails. "This neighborhood's going downhill," his father mumbled as he drove. Outside, the familiar buildings passed by in a dull blur. The laundromat, Metro's cell phones, Wilson's pharmacy, quick check cashing, the pawn shop with the ugly cash for gold sign. Further up the block, closer to Bluford, was Graham's store and then Fatburger, the fast food joint where Tyray hung out many times after school, usually with money he stole from Darryl. It all seemed so long ago. "Gonna be like 43rd Street around here soon. You'll see," Dad grumbled. Tyray cringed. He knew all about 43rd Street. It was the first place he went to buy a gun. He had gone straight to Jupiter James, a Bluford dropout everyone knew was a drug dealer. Jupiter's older brother, Londell, would have been Tyray's first choice, but he was locked up last year for attempted murder. The night Tyray went to pick up the weapon, he got jumped. Someone smashed his head with a stick and robbed him while he was down. Tyray was so desperate afterward that he stole money from Mom. He used it to buy a gun from Bones, a scary old thug who had been in the neighborhood for years. Bones sold him the weapon right behind Fatburger. Tyray's hand trembled slightly as he spotted the side street where he had met Bones. He buried it in his sleeve so Dad wouldn't see. A minute later, they arrived at the store where Darryl worked. Tyray's stomach sank. "It's back there," he said, pointing to an alley that ran along the edge of the store parking lot. The asphalt was slick from rain that had fallen the night before. A few sections were cracked and sunken, making shallow puddles the size of graves. Dad's jaws were clenched. A vein bulged just behind his temple as he wheeled the pickup around and pulled to a stop. He shoved the gear into park and yanked the keys from the ignition. "Show me," he grunted. Tyray felt an acid taste in his mouth as he led his father to the straggly shrubs where he had hidden the night before, waiting for Darryl. "Here," he said, feeling as if he were about to vomit. We were here." He pointed to where he had knocked Darryl off his bike. A muddy gash marked where the bicycle tires had scraped the ground. Just hours earlier, he had stood in the same spot, pointing a gun at Darryl's head. The moment flashed through his mind. "Please don't kill me," Darryl had cried, tears running down his face, his voice cracked and choked with fear. In the gloomy drizzle, Darryl had looked like a child, not a 15-year-old. "Please," he had begged. All Tyray had to do was pull the trigger, and Darryl Mercer would have been gone, erased. But Tyray couldn't do it. He had never wanted to be a killer, but somehow things had gotten out of control. A near failure at school. Tyray had been almost friendless since Darryl humiliated him. He couldn't imagine going back to school with everyone hating him. He could only see one way out, one way to make it all go away. He raised the gun away from Darryl and pointed it at his own skull. His hand trembled in the quiet drizzle, and he braced for the blast he knew was coming. Boom! But just before he had pulled the trigger, Darryl dove at him, knocking his hand away. The shot thundered harmlessly into the air. If Darryl had been a second slower, Tyray knew he never would have made it home. His parents looked stunned when he crept in 3 hours late, covered in mud, his eyes wet from rain and sweat and tears. Mr. Mitchell, his English teacher, was there. He had heard the rumors in school that Tyray had a gun, and he came to talk to his parents. Facing them, Tyray confessed his problems at Bluford and how he had bought a gun, but he never told them about putting the gun to his own head. "I didn't do nothing to Darryl," he explained. "I knew it wasn't right, so I just threw the gun away. That's all that happened, I swear." Mr. Mitchell nodded grimly as Tyray spoke. Later, Tyray overheard the teacher suggest they see a family counselor. Dad shrugged off the idea. "I respect what you're saying, Mr. Mitchell, but we can handle our own problems. We don't need someone coming in here telling us how to raise our son." Tyray was relieved. He didn't want some stranger trying to figure out what he had almost done, but he could tell by his mother's eyes that she disagreed with Dad's decision, though she didn't say anything. It was always that way. "Where is it?" Dad asked, breaking his thoughts. He was hunched over a thick clump of weeds looking for the weapon. "Which way did you throw it?" Tyray studied the ground and retraced his steps. He walked over to where he stood when Darrell shoved his arm. Nearby was a muddy puddle the size of a headstone. Tyray peered into the shallow black pool. He could see the gun, its barrel barely peeking up from the murky water. It was pointed right at his feet. "It's right here." "Don't touch it!" Dad snapped, darting in front of him. He reached into the puddle and pulled out the weapon. Its slick metal glistened weakly in the dim morning light. "Come on, let's go," Dad huffed, throwing it into a white plastic bag and rushing back to the truck as if he were afraid others might see them. Seconds later, they were heading home. "I still can't believe what you did," Dad barked. He gunned the accelerator and the old truck lurched forward. Tyray said nothing. He kept his eyes locked on the streets outside his window, anything to avoid his father's face. "This ain't over yet, neither," Dad fumed. "What if his family presses charges?" "Darrell wouldn't do that. He ain't no snitch. He never told anyone the whole time I was hassling him," Tyray admitted. "Oh, so you got it all figured out now, is that what you're saying?" Dad asked, smacking the steering wheel as they pulled to a stop at an intersection. Across from them, a police car waited at a red light. Dad eyed it nervously. "You think his mama's gonna sit still when he tells her some boy from school put a gun to his head?" Tyray rubbed his forehead. He hadn't thought of that. Would Darrell tell her what happened? "Cops might come for you yet, and I won't be able to do nothing about it," Dad said as the light turned green. They both watched in silence as the police car slowly passed. Tyray glanced in the rearview mirror to see the car stop, turn around, and begin following them. "Maybe I should have never come home," Tyray thought. "Maybe I would have been better off if Darrell were slower. Just a second or two." The dark thoughts swirled in his mind as they returned to their small rancher. The police car trailed them the entire way back. Finally, as they pulled into the driveway, it passed by. Dad sighed, wiped his brow, and grabbed the plastic bag with the gun. "So, where'd you get this thing, anyway?" Tyray shrugged. He wasn't sure how to answer. "Boy, I'm talking to you. Look at me. Where'd you get this gun?" Dad repeated. Tyray glanced up at his father. Deep creases lined his forehead, and a vein throbbed in his neck. His left hand still clutched the steering wheel. "Don't make me repeat myself again," Dad warned. Tyray didn't know what to do. If he didn't answer, Dad might hit him. He could see it in his eyes. It was as if his father had forgotten the promises he had made to Mr. Mitchell last night. "I'm going to try and be more patient with him," he had said when he shook the teacher's hand. "Speak, boy," Dad boomed, grabbing the collar of Tyray's sweatshirt in his fist. "Bones," Tyray wanted to say. He pictured the skinny man with the voice that crackled like dry leaves and a cough that sounded like death itself. "I got it from some scary dude named Bones." But Tyray couldn't say the name. He was afraid that if word got out, Bones might come after him or his family. He had heard stories in the neighborhood and knew the man was dangerous. Bones even admitted to him that he had killed someone. "Some dude on 43rd Street. I never seen him before," Tyray lied. "I don't even know his name. I just gave him the money and that was it." His father shoved him back against the passenger door as if Tyray's words disgusted him. "Don't be lying to me, Tyray. Not after all this. If you're protecting one of your friends—" "I ain't lying, Dad. I swear." Tyray tried his best to sound convincing, but he could see his father wasn't fooled. He had gone to 43rd Street to buy a gun from Londell James, but he ended up getting robbed by some kids instead. That's when he turned to Bones. "Boy, I don't even want to look at you right now," Dad fumed. He took his keys in the plastic bag and stormed toward the house. "What's wrong?" Mom said, meeting Dad at the door. "He's lying. Right now, after everything that happened, he's still lying. I don't care what Mr. Mitchell says," Dad growled, turning and pointing at him. "He don't know you like I do. Your butt is grounded, you hear me?" Tyray shrugged. "If I'd have been faster, you wouldn't have to bother with me no more, Dad. Maybe then you'd be happy," he wanted to say, but his mouth felt glued shut. He couldn't speak. "I don't even want to look at his lying face right now," Dad yelled. "Gil, please." "What? He could have killed a boy last night," his father hollered, slamming his fist against the side of the house. "But he didn't," Mom insisted, touching his shoulders. "He walked away. He knew better." "Yeah, well, how come he didn't know better when he stole your money? Or when he snuck out in the middle of the night and hid a gun in his mattress? Or when he was beating up that boy for months? Or when he lied to my face just now, huh?" Dad barked, hurling questions like punches. Mom stepped back as if Dad's words hurt. "I'll tell you why. 'Cause he's no good," Dad yelled, shouldering past her into the house, carrying the plastic bag. "He's going to throw his life away too, just like his brother." "Gil, you know that's not true," Mom protested, but Dad was already inside. Tyray heard a door slam and something shatter in the kitchen. He flinched at the sound and sat down on the front stoop. For years, he mostly ignored Dad's rants, which had become much worse since Warren was arrested. But this time was different. This time, Dad's words cut like a dagger in his heart. Tyray knew his father was right. Chapter 2. "He's no good." Tyray still heard Dad's voice in his head as he forced himself to Bluford High School and darted toward the back row of his English class. Thunk! Tyray's cast bumped someone's desk, sending a book slapping to the floor. He ignored it and tried to pretend everything was normal, but as he neared his seat, he could feel his classmates watching him. Mr. Mitchell and Darryl hadn't yet arrived. "Maybe Darryl's snitching on me right now," Tyray thought. He imagined the smaller boy talking to Principal Spencer. If so, he knew he would be called to the office and have to admit to everyone what really happened. The idea made his stomach churn. Tyray glanced around the noticeably quiet classroom. The stares of his classmates seemed to crawl all over him. He knew they had heard the rumors that he had a gun. But had they heard worse? Did Darryl tell them the truth? Is that why they were watching him? Tyray couldn't stand it. "What you all looking at?" he grumbled finally. No one answered. Jamie Wills and Amberlyn Bailey, two girls on the cheerleading squad, turned away as if he were beneath them. Rodney Banks, his old friend, shrugged his shoulders and ignored him. Tasha Jenkins whispered something to Janelle Wiggins, and they both shook their heads. Other students flipped through notebooks and acted as if he wasn't even there. Only Harold Davis, Darryl's best friend, faced him. Normally, Harold was too scared to even look his way, but now the chubby boy eyed him warily. Had Darryl called Harold last night and told him everything? "You should have seen him, Harold. He was sitting in this puddle crying like a baby. For real, I couldn't believe it," Tyray imagined Darryl saying. It made him cringe. Harold rose from his desk and walked toward him. Tyray suddenly felt cornered. He couldn't just sit there and wait for what was coming. "What you want, fat boy?" Tyray challenged, standing up. "Ain't you got a sandwich to eat or something?" He had teased Harold countless times about his weight, calling him Heavy D or HD back when they were in middle school. But now he didn't want to insult Harold. He just wanted him and everyone else to go away. Harold shrugged and lowered his eyes to the ground. "Nah," he mumbled. "I just want my book." Tyray followed Harold's eyes and saw a book lying at his feet, a worn copy of their latest English reading assignment, Lord of the Flies. Tyray realized he had knocked it to the floor when he rushed into the classroom. Careful to hide his relief, Tyray sucked his teeth and kicked the book toward the large boy. Harold crouched over, grunted, and grabbed it. Man, you better stop eating, Heavy D, Tyray teased, trying to pretend everything was the same as always. Or you're gonna need a bra. Why you gotta be so rude? Said a voice from the other side of the room. Tyray looked over to see Jamie Wills. At least Harold don't go stealing money from girls. Tyray winced. He didn't need Jamie to remind him of what he had done to Lark Collins. The shy, frumpy girl was the only person who had been nice to him after his humiliation in the cafeteria. But Tyray had used her, convincing her to give him $40 for a gift for his mother. He actually wanted the money to buy a gun. When Lark found out that he had lied to her, she flashed him a sad look that tore his insides with guilt. Tyray pictured it when he held the gun to his head. Ain't no one said your name, Jamie. Why don't you just mind your own business, he snapped. The classroom was filling. Tyray knew everyone was listening. He wished Jamie would just shut up and leave him alone. My friend is my business, Jamie huffed. Maybe you'd understand if you had some friends. A few students gasped at her words. Tasha pulled out her cell phone and texted something, her thumbs working in a feverish blur. Tyray tried to pretend Jamie's comment meant nothing, but for an instant he was speechless. Part of him felt the urge to slap the smug look right off her face, the way Dad sometimes treated him, but he could never hit a girl. Jamie, if my friends were anything like you, I'd rather be alone, he grumbled, trying to act as if nothing had changed, as if the moment in the alley didn't haunt him, as if his father's words weren't eating invisibly at his chest. I don't know why Lark ever talked to you, Jamie said, turning away from him. She's too good for you. Tyray cursed under his breath and slouched in his seat. He knew she was right. Just then, Darryl Mercer stepped into the class. An ugly scrape covered his right elbow. Tyray knew it was from when he had knocked him off his bike. For an instant, Tyray pictured him lifeless at his feet. It had all come so close. Darryl sat down and glanced back once at Tyray. What's up? He said quickly before turning around and facing the front of the room. Tyray froze, unable to speak. His throat felt as if someone was gripping his neck. The entire classroom hushed. It was as if everyone was stunned by Darryl's gesture. Even Harold, Darryl's close friend, looked puzzled. Did you see that? Ain't they supposed to be hating on each other? Tyray could see the questions on their faces. Their surprise told him Darryl had kept quiet. He hadn't told them what happened. Not yet. Ring! The first period bell blasted overhead. Mr. Mitchell walked in, shattering the moment. He glanced for half a second at Tyray and began taking attendance, as he did every other school day. It was as if yesterday had never happened. Today we're going to talk about violence, Mr. Mitchell said then, picking up his copy of Lord of the Flies. We've all seen it. Too many of us have experienced it, including some of you. Me too, he added with a look toward Darryl. I want to know why. A few students grumbled and rolled their eyes. Others shrugged as if what he said made no sense, but most turned to the front of the room. Tyray was relieved to finally escape their stares. I'm serious. How can we stop what we don't understand? We lose more young people in this country to shootings each year than we do in wars. I'm tired of it. I don't want to lose anyone else, especially not you. So let's explore this problem, Mr. Mitchell continued. Many folks have theories about violence. Some blame society. They say people are born peaceful, but that civilization, money, and power makes them violent. Others say people are born violent, and that civilization, laws, and police keep us safe. A few students snickered at the mention of the police, but Mr. Mitchell ignored them. Your book talks about this, but before we get started, I wonder what you think. Where does violence come from? Tyray squirmed in his seat. He didn't want to hear about violence or the police, especially after last night. The images of what had almost happened blazed raw and fresh in his mind. He felt like getting up and walking out of the classroom. Instead, he slouched low at his desk and waited for class to end. The teacher didn't call on him the entire period. Can I speak with you, Tyray? Mr. Mitchell asked as soon as class ended. Tyray nodded. After last night, he expected it. "Listen," Mr. Mitchell began, careful to shut the door once the class emptied. Tyray braced himself. He knew some students liked Mr. Mitchell because he tried to help them with their problems. Until yesterday, Tyray thought the teacher was nosy. "I know things have been rough on you, but I want to tell you something. No matter what anyone says or what you're feeling inside, you need to know what you did last night was brave." "Brave?" Tyray couldn't look the teacher in the eye. Normally, he would say Mr. Mitchell's words were corny and stupid. Now Tyray thought he was just plain wrong. "You don't understand. You don't even know what happened," he wanted to say. "That's right. You are brave enough to walk away. Not everyone does that, Tyray. They're so worried about their reputation that they do something they know is wrong. Or worse, some of them are so hurt inside, they don't care anymore. Not you. I can see you care. You faced all that stuff down and did the right thing. That's what being a man is." "But you don't know what I was about to do," Tyray thought. "You don't know nothing." Tyray's words caught in his throat. "And because you did that, Daryl's still here, and you're still here, and no one's in jail," Mr. Mitchell explained. "And no one's mother is crying this morning. It could have been very different. We both know that." Tyray stared at the floor. His eyes started to burn and sting. "You changed your whole life just like that." Mr. Mitchell snapped his fingers to make his point. "There's a whole world out there, Tyray, bigger than this school or someone's reputation. Because you walked away, you still got a chance to see it. I'm happy you made the choice you did. So's your dad, even though he might not know how to show it." Tyray cringed at the mention of Dad. "He ain't happy about nothing," Tyray grumbled. "Especially me." Mr. Mitchell nodded. "Look, if you ever need to talk, I know someone who—" "Need to talk?" Tyray repeated. "Man, what you trying to say?" "Come on, Tyray. We both know you have a lot going on. Sometimes it can help to sit down with someone. I know a counselor. He's helped a lot of young people, and I think he could help you." "I don't need no counselor or whatever. There ain't nothing wrong with me," he said, rising from his seat, angry with himself for almost letting the teacher get to him. There was no way he was going to tell some stranger what almost happened. No way. "Tyray, sorry, but I gotta go, Mr. Mitchell. I don't want to be late," he said, storming off to his next class. "How are we doing, Mr. Hobbs?" Principal Spencer asked Tyray hours later. She stood in her usual spot at the cafeteria doorway, eyeing students as they approached for lunch. "I'm fine, Miss Spencer," Tyray grumbled. He slipped his brother's old iPod deep in the pocket of his black hoodie so she wouldn't see it. "Things a little better today?" she asked, peering at him curiously. He knew she had heard the rumors too. She even had his locker searched for a gun earlier in the week. Of course, she found nothing. He had kept the weapon away from school. "No, Miss Spencer, they ain't no better. But what you gonna do about it?" he wanted to say. Instead, he nodded. "Yeah, they great. Never better," he said. "I hope so," she said, with an edge to her voice. He barged past her into the noisy cafeteria. The air was filled with the roar of students talking, the slap of backpacks hitting the ground, the groan of plastic chairs scraping against the tile floor. Tyray glanced at the spot where his whole world had crashed down just 2 weeks ago. He knew the cafeteria was full of people who had witnessed it and laughed at him, people who had pretended to like him until that day. "I never liked you neither," he mumbled to himself, fighting back the anger that still boiled in his chest. He grabbed the iPod from his pocket and stepped into the lunch line when a familiar face came through the side door. It was Lark. Wearing loose jeans and a frumpy purple sweatshirt, she stepped to her table and dropped her heavy denim book bag. Back in middle school, he used to chuckle when girls like Natalie Wallace and Shanetta Green teased Lark for being quiet and always having her nose stuck in a book. He had even laughed along, but Lark never held it against him. When he broke his wrist, she didn't join others in teasing him. Instead, she told him she felt bad about what had happened. "And all I did was take her money," he thought. "Come on, man, stop daydreaming. Move." The voice shattered Tyray's thoughts. He turned around and realized the line had moved forward. He was holding everyone up. "Wake up, yo!" Someone else yelled. "I'm hungry." Tyray cursed and stepped forward. He had stolen money from lots of kids, including Daryl, never thinking twice about it. But something about Lark made him feel worse than all the others. Maybe it was the innocent way she smiled at him, as if she saw something in him no one else could see. He cranked up the iPod to block out his thoughts and grabbed a tray of spongy chicken nuggets and watery green beans. "Some say to be great is to be misunderstood, but they don't come to my neighborhood." He swaggered out with his food, letting the music drown out the voices of everyone around him. But then he saw her again, Lark. Now Jamie, Cindy, and Amberlynn had joined her at the table. "She's too good for you," Jamie had said. He knew she was right. If only he could pay Lark back. "Where school is a prison, and a prison is a school, and living is passing, and surviving is the rule." The music pounded as each girl at Lark's table turned and glared at him. If only he could show Lark he was sorry, that he had thought of her the moment he had raised the gun to his head. But how? He had no money. "Do you feel me? Can you even hear? I'ma scream louder before I disappear." And then it hit him. He yanked off his earphones and walked toward their table. Why hadn't he thought of it before? It would only take a minute. "Hey, what's up, Lark?" he said, ignoring the stares that locked on him like gun sights. "Will you just leave her alone?" Jamie said before Lark could even respond. "She's over you. Done. See ya." "Yeah, she don't want nothing to do with you," Amberlynn added. "I ain't talking to neither of you," Tyray shot back. All he needed was a minute with Lark. That's all it would take. "Lark, can we talk?" "What do you want?" asked Lark finally. He could see the tiny hairline scar above her lip. She had told him she'd gotten it when she fell down her grandma's steps when she was a kid. Tyray wasn't sure if that was the truth. "You don't need to talk to him, Lark," cut in Jamie. "Ignore him. He's just a wannabe thug who got what he deserves." Jamie's words hit Tyray like a slap in the face. "Girl, I'm sick of y'all talking about me," he snapped, unable to control himself. "You don't know nothing. Why don't you just keep your ugly mug out of my business?" Heads turned toward them. Tyray could feel it all slipping out of control, like always. He noticed that his voice sounded like Dad's. "Why, what you gonna do? Shoot her with your cast?" mocked Dante, a sophomore from a nearby table. All his friends erupted in laughter. "Yeah, he gonna be like this," joked Louise, one of Daryl's friends from the wrestling team. As he spoke, he crumpled up his sleeve into a mock broken arm, and then pretended to shoot it as if it were a pathetic gun. The laughter spread like wildfire. Tyray gripped his tray, fighting the urge to swing it at Louise's face. "I told you," Dante said. "He all talk. Been dishing it out all year, but now he can't take it." "Yo, come on, guys," a voice cut in. "Just drop it, all right?" He turned to see Daryl stepping toward them, carrying his lunch. Tyray's stomach sank. It was bad enough that he had seen him cry. Now the smaller boy was standing up for him. It was almost more humiliating than when he had broken his wrist. He wanted Daryl to shut up, but he couldn't bring himself to say it, not after what happened. The cafeteria suddenly felt as if it was closing in. The stares, the laughter, the whispers, Daryl's pity. Tyray had to get out. Without a word, he slammed his tray on an empty table. Silverware clanged to the floor. Food splattered. Hundreds of heads spun around to see what was happening. Tyray grabbed his brother's old iPod. "Here," he said tensely, putting it down in front of Lark. It was the only thing he had that was worth any money. His one chance to do something right, no matter what everyone else thought. He needed her to have it. "What's this?" she asked. "I owe you $40. I wanted to pay you back, and this is all I got right now," he explained. Jamie and Amberlynn looked up at him as if he had just spoken a strange language. Lark stood up. "Tyray, I can't keep this," she said, but he ignored her. He stepped over the mess and headed toward the door. "Tyray!" Lark called. "Tyray!" He stormed out, not once looking back. Chapter 3 You all right? Darryl Mercer asked. They were in gym class, waiting for Mr. Dooling to take attendance. Tyray hadn't said a word to Darryl since the blow-up in the cafeteria last week. The episode only seemed to make Tyray the target of even more jokes at school. Why are you talking to me? Tyray asked. Each time he saw Darryl's face, the scene in the alley replayed in his mind. Well, after everything, Darryl stammered, with the guys in the cafeteria and all, I just thought, look, just 'cause all that happened don't mean we're friends. We both know that ain't true. You don't gotta pretend, Tyray said, glancing at his cast. Besides, the whole school's gonna think I'm a punk if you stick up for me again. Who cares what they think? Like you even understand, Tyray grumbled. Are you serious? Darryl said. After what you did to me all year? Oh, so that's what this is about? You trying to rub it in my face? No, I'm just saying, or maybe you feeling sorry for me after what you saw, Tyray said, a wave of bitterness sweeping over him. I don't need you or anyone looking down on me. It's not like that. Man, you gotta stop. Stop what? You don't even know what's going on, Mercer, so don't tell me what I gotta do, Tyray fumed. Pretend what you saw never happened. Go hang with Harold or your little wrestling crew. I don't need no one watching my back, especially not you. You hear me? Quiet back there, Mr. Dooling yelled from the front of the gym. Yeah, Mr. Dooling, tell this boy to be quiet, Tyray said. It took all his effort to hide the emotion in his voice, a mix of anger, hurt, and shame. Darryl shook his head and turned away. Tyray avoided him for the rest of the period, sitting on the bleachers with his broken wrist while everyone else ran laps on the track behind the high school. When class finally ended, Tyray rushed straight to his locker. He was dialing his combination when he spotted Lark at the end of the hallway. She was coming toward him. He pretended he didn't notice, hoping he could sneak out without having to face her. He yanked open his locker, grabbed his jacket, and slammed it shut. He was ready to dash down the hallway when she called out, Tyray, wait! He took a step, but then stopped himself, fighting the urge to walk away and leave her there in the hallway. She was at his side in seconds, though he could barely stand to look at her. Shame and guilt pulled his eyes away from hers. What do you want? He asked. I didn't mean for that to happen. I'm sorry. For what? He avoided her eyes. He didn't want her sympathy. It only made him feel worse. Everybody in the cafeteria the other day. They shouldn't have said those things to you. Tyray shrugged. Why not? Maybe they're right, he mumbled. Look, I ain't got time to talk right now. I'm grounded and my dad is going to flip out if I'm late. A crowd of students passed by and Lark stepped closer to him. Here, she said, holding out the iPod. Take this. Nah, it's yours. He refused to take it and turned to walk away, but Lark grabbed his arm. The sleeve of his sweatshirt pulled back, revealing the bone-like cast. She gasped in surprise and let go awkwardly. I'm sorry, Tyray, but I can't keep it. It belongs to you. When you get the money, you can pay me back then. Girl, please, just let me do this, he said, annoyed at how desperate he sounded. He needed to repay her somehow, to prove to himself he could do something right, at least to her. Just one thing, no matter what his father or anyone else said. I never should have lied to you and taken your money, he added, remembering the way Lark had looked at him. He could feel her staring at him, but the shame he felt kept his eyes locked on the floor. All he could see was Lark's heavy book bag. It was covered in tiny tan hairs. She seemed to notice and started brushing them off. My cat, she said, as if she were slightly embarrassed. She's shedding. You like cats? She asked, as if she was trying to change the subject. They all right, I guess, he replied. For years he had wanted to have a pet, but Dad always said no. We have 2 of them. You can borrow Ginger if you want. She's the one who's shedding. Your cast might look good covered in cat fur, she teased. He looked up at her then. He noticed her nervous smile, the faint scar above her lip, her dark hair pulled back off her round face. He could see why other girls used to tease her. She seemed vulnerable somehow. He had known that the day he lied and took her money. That's why I did it, he thought guiltily. Jamie's right. Lark's too good for me. Look, I gotta go. He stepped away from her. Just keep it, all right? I can't, but I got an idea, she said. She reached into her book bag and pulled out a thick black marker. You promised to pay me back, right? Girl, I told you I would. Good, she said with a grin as she pulled off the marker cap and began drawing on his cast. What are you doing? You'll see. This is so you remember. A few seconds later, she backed away. Fancy letters now covered a section of his cast. T's Promise, they read. The letters were strong and angular, standing out bold and black against the cast like the murals painted on vacant buildings in the neighborhood. That looks good. Where'd you learn that? Her face lit up at his compliment. Practice, I guess. I used to draw whenever I got mad at something. I guess I got mad a lot. Oh, so now you mad at me? Not anymore, she admitted. I know you're going to pay me back. I can tell, she replied, flashing him a smile that made his face warm. How come you so sure? I don't know. I just am. Jamie thinks you're trying to play me again, but I told her she was wrong. You don't seem to be playing, but if you are, I'll never forgive you. Not again, she said. Here. Lark handed Tyray the iPod. For a second their hands brushed, and he could feel the warmth of her skin and the slight tremble in her fingers. He was surprised at how much her threat bothered him. He slipped the iPod into his sweatshirt pocket and covered up his cast. The hallway was emptying. He remembered his father and how he had to go straight home after school. Already he was late. I really gotta go. My dad's gonna kill me, he said, turning away from her. I'm gonna pay you back, though. You better. You promised, she said, gently tapping his cast and grinning back at him. There was no way he would let her down, no matter what anyone said, not even Dad. Tyray glanced twice at his cast as he followed his usual route home, rushing past Bluford's blacktop courts and cutting through the Superfoods lot to Union Street. He knew if he kept the pace, he would be home on time. In the afternoon sun, with Lark's smile on his mind, Tyray thought the area seemed nothing like it had that ghostly morning with Dad. A young woman with a stroller crossed the street to Graham's. A few Bluford students walked nearby. The heavy scent of hamburgers from nearby Fatburger filled the air. Tyray wanted to stop in, but he had no money and no time. That's when he noticed a Help Wanted sign posted on the door. Don't forget to get Bug's cheeseburger, someone called out. Tyray turned to see a golden Nissan sedan. It was parked along the curb just a half a block ahead. Its chrome rims sparkled beneath dark-tinted windows. 2 kids stood next to it. One was a young boy he had never seen before, maybe a 3rd or 4th grader, but the other was an older, light-skinned boy with a wiry build. He had yelled out to someone who just slipped inside Fatburger. Tyray knew his face. They had met on 43rd Street. He was the guy who told Tyray to come to the lot in the middle of the night to pick up his gun. Tyray did what the boy said and got beaten up and robbed. The money stolen that night was Lark's. Tyray froze in the middle of the sidewalk. His heart started pounding. His hands tingled. He knew he had to get home, that he should just walk away. He could almost hear Mr. Mitchell urging him to do just that, but he couldn't stop himself. Yo, what you doing here? Tyray yelled. The kid turned. Immediately his eyes narrowed. Tyray could see that he recognized him too. Man, you're the one that took my money, Tyray growled. Give it back. I didn't take no money from you. What you talking about? Tyray rushed to the car and moved right to the boy's face. The younger kid stepped back and ran off. Tyray ignored him. Don't lie to me. You told me to meet you and I got jumped. Now give me my money back before I bust your face. Tyray's pulse throbbed in his neck. He knew he had to go home, but he couldn't walk away from the kid who set him up, especially not after seeing Lark. "Look, I didn't take your money," the kid said, looking at Tyray's broken arm. "And if I was you, I'd get out of here, 'cause you ain't over your head right now." "Just give me my money," Tyray shouted. "I ain't giving you nothing. Now get out of my face," the boy said, shoving Tyray back. He stumbled on the curb and his cast thudded against the Nissan. Tyray regained his footing and charged back just as a blur appeared at his side. Thunk! Pain exploded into Tyray's ribs, making him double over. He barely realized he had been hit before another blow hammered down on the back of his head. He slammed to the ground, scraping the side of his face on the curb. Warren's iPod flew from his pocket. "See?" the boy said, standing over him with his hands balled up into fists, ready to strike. "What you gonna do now, huh? You should have listened to me." Tyray looked up to see Jupiter James leaning over him. His saggy jeans were gathered over heavy boots that were just inches from Tyray's face. "You again?" Jupiter mocked. "What's wrong? You forgot what happened last time?" "That's enough, Jupe. Come on, I already told you I don't want no trouble around here," said a different voice, older and deeper than the others. "This ain't trouble," Jupiter replied. "He the one that started it, right, Keenan?" The light-skinned boy nodded and spit on the ground just inches from Tyray. Tyray was stunned. Just like Dad said, the crew from 43rd Street was in his neighborhood. Even more surprising was the man standing behind Jupiter smoking a cigarette and wearing a black leather jacket. It was Londell, Jupiter's big brother. Tyray thought he was locked up at Cliffside Prison like Warren. Everyone knew he had been involved in a shooting last year where Roy Lynn Bailey, Amberlin's older brother, got grazed by a bullet. How could he be out so soon? Tyray grabbed his ribs and sat up. He felt as if he was going to vomit. "Next time this won't be the only thing you lose," Jupiter said, leaning over and picking up the iPod. "No, you can't take that," Tyray charged. "That's my brother's." "I don't see his name on it," Jupe mocked, slipping it into his pocket and moving toward the car. "You see a name on it, Key?" "Yeah, it says Jupe," Keenan replied, laughing. "No, that's my brother's," Tyray repeated. "He in Cliffside. Come on, give it back." Jupiter stopped for a second. Londell turned at the mention of the prison. "Who's your brother?" he asked. "Warren Hobbs. You know him?" "Warren Hobbs?" A smug grin washed across Londell's face. "You mean the prof? You're his little brother?" he said with a mean laugh. "Who's the prof?" Keenan asked. "Just a fool who needs an education about how things really work out here," Londell said, starting the car. "Your brother can't protect you. He can't even protect himself." "What you mean?" Tyray asked, pulling himself up off the ground. "Come on," Londell urged. The crew crowded into the Nissan. Londell glanced at his cell phone and tossed his cigarette butt at Tyray's feet. "Be careful who you're messing with next time, unless you want that other arm broke," he warned. He then gunned the accelerator and the Nissan roared off, leaving Tyray in a cloud of smoke. "No!" Tyray groaned, rising to his feet as the car tore off. People on the corner watched, but no one said a word. A man passed by in a gray sedan looking right at him but didn't stop. The young woman with the baby stroller rushed away as if she were scared of him. Tyray rubbed his cheek and saw a smear of blood on his fingers from where he had hit the concrete. Outrage and disbelief warred inside him. He had been robbed again, twice by the same people, and they even knew his brother. He can't even protect himself. What did that mean? What had happened to Warren? Tyray stomped the curb and cursed. He wished he still had the gun. He pictured himself aiming it at Jupiter, making him give back everything he stole. Then he would turn it on Londell and find out the truth about Warren. But he knew it was all a stupid fantasy. The reality was that he was alone on the sidewalk, bleeding, and the guys who jumped him were free. And Warren was locked up and in danger, and his father hated him. And no one seemed to care if he had his skull stomped right there on the street. Tyray felt cursed as he stared back at the strangers who ignored him. It took all his strength not to scream. Chapter 4. "You're late," Mom called as Tyray opened the front door. He was relieved to hear the running faucet and the clatter of dishes in the sink. It meant his mother was in the kitchen and couldn't see his face. He darted straight to the bathroom. "You should have been here at 3:15. It's almost 4 o'clock. Where you been?" she asked. It was one of the 2 days each week she got home early from Cottonwood Court Nursing Home, where she worked as a medical assistant. Dad wouldn't be home for another hour. "I met with Mr. Mitchell. He wanted to talk about my English assignment," Tyray lied, locking the bathroom door and looking in the mirror. A thumb-sized scrape ran along his jaw. He knew he couldn't hide it from her, but it almost didn't matter. His mind was spinning with what happened and what he had just learned. Warren was in trouble. Tyray left the bathroom and walked to the kitchen. Mom's back was to him, and she was mumbling, half to him and half to herself. "So help me, Tyray. I hope you're not lying again. If we have to, we'll ground you until you're 21. Mom, how come you and Dad don't visit Warren no more?" She turned, her eyes fixed on his face, and her jaw dropped. A bowl slipped from her fingers and banged into the counter. "What happened to your face? Who did this to you, baby?" "It ain't no big thing. I was rushing to get home on time and slipped, that's all." His mother examined him closely, touching the raw skin on his cheek. He winced and pulled away from her. "You didn't answer me. How come you and Dad never go to Cliffside? You should see him," he said, the worry building in his chest. "Maybe I could come too." "Tyray, why are you bringing this up right now?" "Because it's been over a year since they took him away. We ain't heard from him in months. What if something happened?" "What are you talking about?" Mom asked, peering into his eyes. "Who have you been talking to?" "No one," Tyray answered quickly, trying to stay calm. He couldn't tell her he had spoken to Londell James. That would only make things worse. "I'm just saying, it's been a long time. It ain't right that you cut him off." "Cut him off? We never cut him off." "Yes, you did. You act like he don't even exist. Dad gets mad whenever I say his name," Tyray said. Mom took a deep breath and rubbed her temples. "There's a lot you don't know, Tyray." "What do you mean?" "Look, I'm not going to go into it all now. Your father said—" "I don't care what he said, Ma. He don't do nothing but yell and complain all the time. He don't even care what happens," Tyray huffed, feeling a wave of bitterness as he spoke. "No, Tyray, you got him all wrong. He cares, it's just he's—" Mom paused as if she was about to say something, but then changed her mind. "He doesn't always know how to show it." "Yeah, right." "Excuse me?" Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "I know you think you know everything right now, but you don't, okay? Your father and I fought hard for Warren, but he didn't want to listen. All he wanted to do was hang out with his boys or that girlfriend Chantel. Then one night he holds up a store," she exclaimed, shaking her head as she spoke. "I still can't believe it." Tyray couldn't either. He remembered how Warren changed during his junior year of high school, becoming secretive and irritable. Sometimes he stayed out all night, despite Dad's yelling. Once Dad threatened to kick him out if he didn't start listening. Warren promised he would, but a few days later the police came. Tyray had been in a deep sleep when the pounding started. Bang, bang, bang. The blows were so strong they knocked the pictures off the wall. Tyray heard them smash to the ground just outside his bedroom. Dad had rushed down the hall, but he was powerless to stop the officers from shouldering him aside. Tyray covered his eyes as piercing white lights flooded his room and then beamed down the hallway. Mom shrieked and Dad yelled. "Not my son! He didn't do nothing! You're making a mistake!" he had said over and over again. Tyray still remembered the muffled sounds of men's voices coming from his brother's room. Then a sickening thud shook the floor. He had rushed to the edge of the hallway to see the policeman yank Warren out in handcuffs. "Tell him you didn't do it, Warren," Dad pleaded. "Tell him the truth, boy." Warren had stumbled forward, his eyes wide with fear. He glanced back at them for an instant. "I'm sorry," was all he said before they forced him outside. Tyray felt a raw gush of anger whenever he remembered that night. It had never really gone away, a scar that wouldn't heal. He would feel it when he looked in Warren's empty room or noticed the scuff marks where the officer's shoes scraped the floor. He even felt it at Bluford sometimes, a rage that had fueled his attacks on others, including Darryl. "I know it hurts to hear this," Mom said, snapping him out of his thoughts. "But Warren brought this problem on himself." Tyray scratched at his broken wrist, feeling the anger swirl in him again. "But that don't mean you should just forget him," he blurted. No matter what Mom said, he still couldn't understand why they had given up on Warren. "No one forgot him," Mom yelled. "I think about him every day. I brought that boy into this world and raised him right so he could make a good life for himself. There's no way I could forget him." "Then visit him, Mom," Tyray said, feeling his voice shake. "And take me with you." Mom looked at Tyray for a minute, as if she were debating what to say. "Listen, Tyray, we never told you, but the last time we went to Cliffside, Warren got into an argument with your father. We started talking about responsibility, and he got upset and started cursing, telling us we don't understand nothing. He went back to his cell and told the guard he didn't want to see us again. Since then, he hasn't answered my letters. What are we supposed to do?" she asked, her voice quivering. "Go on, tell me, since you got all the answers." Tyray sucked his teeth as Mom's words slowly sank in. He hadn't gotten a letter from Warren in over 6 months. Maybe his brother was angry at them, but what did that have to do with him? And no matter what, it didn't change what Londell said. Warren could be in trouble, and no one would know it. "Maybe I can go see him myself," he suggested. He noticed his mother's face change for an instant, as if he had said something that made sense. But just as quickly, it changed back. "No, Tyray, this is a prison, not a park. They don't just let kids go walking around. You gotta be on their list and have proper ID. You're supposed to have an adult with you, too. Besides, I don't want you to go there. It's not a place I want you to see. Come on, Ma. If he don't want to see you, maybe he'll see me. At least then we'll know he's okay," he said, struggling to hide his worries. "Boy, I don't know what's gotten into you. Warren's been gone over a year, and you've never acted like this." Mom inspected his face again, as if she thought he had a fever. Tyray glanced at the family pictures hanging on the wall, one from Christmas when Tyray was 10, the other from a barbecue they had on Warren's 15th birthday. Warren had a corny smile because Tyray had teased him about his new girlfriend, Chantel, seconds before the photo was taken. Warren hated the picture, but Mom had insisted on hanging it. Looking at his brother, Tyray felt the sadness tugging at him again. He couldn't tell Mom everything that was on his mind, but he couldn't keep quiet either. "I miss him, Ma." The words almost caught in his throat. He could feel them in his bones. Mom sighed. Tyray knew she was watching him. He wished he could stop the thoughts racing in his head and tell her what really haunted him. "I'm scared. I think something bad happened to Warren. You should have seen the look on Londell's face." Instead, he scuffed his shoe against the cracked linoleum on the kitchen floor. "Tyray, I know you're upset, but it's going to be okay, you hear me?" she said. "What you need to do is worry about the things you can control, so you don't end up in the same place." "You don't even understand," Tyray wanted to say. Instead, he nodded, and his mother kept on talking, listing things he should be doing. Homework, getting involved in school activities, going to church. Her voice droned on, and he stopped listening. Finally, she hugged him. Her touch made him sadder, even more alone. But he didn't fight it. "What's this?" she asked when she released him a few seconds later. She was pointing to the words on his cast. T's promise. "Nothing. Just something some girl wrote on there." He remembered Lark and the debt he still owed her. "Some girl?" "It's nothing, Ma," he replied, covering the cast. Outside, he heard an engine rumble and knew Dad was home from work. There was no way he wanted to talk with him around. They would end up arguing like always. "What's your promise?" "Nothing, Ma. Don't worry about it." Tyray turned and went down the hall to his bedroom and closed the door. In his mind, Londell's voice kept echoing. Warren can't even protect himself. Chapter 5. Tyray arrived at Bluford Monday morning to find Jamie and Amber Lynn waiting for him at his locker. The scowl on Jamie's face cut through the crowded hallway like a spotlight. "Girl, that better not be for me," he thought as he approached them. "Your mug is the last one I want to see right now." "Why you lying to her?" Jamie asked, her eyes darting to the scab on his jaw and then to the writing on his cast. "Huh? You know you're just using her," Jamie grumbled. "I told you she's my friend, and I don't want to see you hurt her again." "Seriously, Jamie, you need to step back, 'cause I can't take this." "Listen to me," Amber Lynn cut in. "Lark is fragile, okay? There's a lot that's going on in her family, and we don't want to see you making it worse." Tyray's head was spinning. The news of his brother had haunted him all weekend. He wasn't ready for something to threaten Lark. "What you mean? Is she okay?" "What we mean is you shouldn't be making promises you can't keep," Jamie snapped, glaring at his cast. Amber Lynn stepped in before Tyray could respond. "What Jamie means is Lark likes you, Tyray. She really does." "Yeah, which is why you should just walk away now, because we know you don't care nothing about her," Jamie hissed. Tyray felt an urge to shove a book in Jamie's mouth so she couldn't talk. He was about to curse her out when another voice cut him off. "What's everybody doing here?" Tyray turned to see Lark. He took a deep breath and swallowed his words. "We were just talking, that's all," Jamie said, her voice a bit high and unnatural. "Yeah, we got a quiz in Mr. Mitchell's class, and Jamie thinks I'm gonna fail it, but I'm gonna prove it wrong," Tyray said, trying his best to sound serious. Lark flashed him a smile. He saw the tiny scar over her lip. He felt bad lying to her again. Overhead, the bell rang and the girls moved down the hallway together. "See you at lunch," Lark said with a weak smile. The day had barely started and already Tyray had a headache. But as he rubbed his forehead, Lark's words blazed on his forearm. At lunchtime, Tyray noticed Lark's friends watching him as he grabbed a seat at an empty table in the far corner of the cafeteria. He was still angry at Jamie for what she had said to him, and yet he almost respected her too. She was just looking out for Lark. He wished he had friends ready to fight for him. But he was alone, even in his own family. So was Warren, he figured. Londell's words had gnawed at him all weekend. He forced down a few bites of the cafeteria's leathery cheeseburger when Lark arrived at his table. There was that smile again, the tiny scar, the enormous book bag sprinkled with cat fur. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. He could see her looking at his cheek, but she didn't mention it. "Nah," he said bitterly, pointing to the empty table. "All my friends will get jealous if you do that." "Yeah, well, they're just going to have to deal with it," she said with a grin as she dropped her book bag. It hit the ground with a heavy thud. "What you carrying in there, bricks?" Tyray asked. "Books," she said, looking a bit embarrassed. "I just got a new one from the library." Tyray rolled his eyes as she fished out a thick, hardbound book with a black and red cover. He read the title, Moonlight. "What's it about?" "Vampires," she admitted sheepishly. "Vampires?" "Yeah, I just love these books. There are like 8 of them. I can't put them down. They even have a movie coming out next month." "For real?" He flipped through the pages. "Why you like them so much?" He had never felt that way about any book. "You sound just like my little brother, Kyle," she said with an odd look on her face. "Well, for one, when I'm reading, I get away. You ever want to just get away?" "Every day," Tyray muttered, remembering what Amber Lynn said about Lark's home. "Plus, they're fun. You remind me of someone in here," she said, putting the book back in the bag. Oh man, I'm not even going to try to guess what that means. I'm not telling, she said, almost blushing. You're just going to have to read it if you want to find out. I don't know about that, Tyray admitted. That's like 500 pages. That's fine. It's my secret then, she said, flashing that smile again. Tyray studied her face. Now that he knew her, she seemed so different than the shy girl others talked about and laughed at. Yes, she was quiet at first, but once he got to know her, she was also funny and smart. And yet she seemed to be hiding something, too. So what do you need to get away from? Tyray asked. In an instant, her face clouded over. You don't want to go there, she said, gently touching the scar on her lip. Anyway, you should read the book. I'm serious. You might like it. Lark was silent for a few seconds. Tyray noticed that she avoided looking at him. In the distance, over her shoulder, he could see Jamie and Amberlynn watching them. What about you? She asked finally, breaking the silence. What are you trying to escape? Please, he said. You ain't even trying to hear that story. If it was a book, it'd be like 2,000 pages. I'm listening. Well, maybe start with a vacation from those two, he joked, pointing to Jamie and Amberlynn. They're just looking out for me. I know that's why they were at your locker this morning. By the way, your lie wasn't any good. You'd never talk to Jamie, especially not about schoolwork. For the first time in weeks, Tyray almost smiled. I thought I had you fooled, he said. Nah, you're going to have to try a little harder next time, Lark replied with a weak smile. Tyray glanced at her and the loyal friends she had just a few feet away. He knew they didn't like him sitting with her, that they wanted to keep her safe. And maybe they were right. Maybe he was dangerous to people like them. But not to Lark. Looking at her scar and the sadness hiding behind her eyes, he knew he wouldn't hurt her again. Instead, he wanted to honor his promise and stop what haunted her. But how? He forced down another leathery bite of his cheeseburger when an idea hit him. A way to pay her back. Tyray headed straight to Fatburger after school. The black and orange sign from the other day still hung in the window. Help wanted. He knew he had to be quick. He opened the familiar glass door and stepped inside. The air was a soupy mix of grease and fried onions. Tyray loved the smell. He headed straight to the line and waited. Up until recently, he would look down at the people behind the counter flipping burgers in their corny uniforms and visors. But that was before he was desperate for money. Can I help you? Grumbled a large, dark-skinned woman behind the counter. Tyray recognized her from when he and Rodney used to go there after school. They would joke about the way she sweated whenever it was busy. Yo, she gonna drip in your fries, Rodney used to say. Yeah, girl, hold that secret sauce, Tyray would say, cracking up in the line as he spent Daryl's money. Now he hoped she didn't remember him. I saw your sign outside. I am looking for a job, he said. He saw a name tag on her chest that read Selma. It was the first time he had ever noticed her name. Selma sucked her teeth and looked down at his cast. She scowled slightly before reaching under the counter and sliding a rumpled application toward him. Next, she huffed. Wait, Tyray said. What do I do? Fill it out. There was an edge to her voice. He knew she remembered him. And then give it to you? Mm-hmm. But you ain't gonna get hired, not with that cast on your arm. You can't cook with that, she said, straightening her visor. Next. Tyray took the application and sat down in a nearby booth. What was the point? He figured. He knew Selma was going to throw his application away as soon as he finished it. He was about to crumple the paper himself when he heard a deep, rattling cough. The sound made him freeze. He knew exactly who it was. Bones. The wiry man crept to the front of the line and ordered. Tyray hadn't seen him since he had sold him the gun. He folded the application and shoved it in his back pocket. He wanted to run out. Yo, little man, said the voice as rough as crushed concrete. Tyray shuddered. Bones grabbed a greasy bag from Selma and came toward him. His skin stretched like worn paper over his skull. "What you doing here, little brother? What happened to your face?" "Nothing," Tyray answered. Just seeing Bones made his insides tremble. "I gotta go. I'm late already." "Late for what?" Bones asked. He reached a long finger in the bag and pulled out some French fries. "Come on, let's go outside." Tyray got up and headed out with Bones following him. "I really gotta go. I'm grounded. My pops wants me home right away." Bones swallowed heavily and dug out more French fries. "You didn't do it, did you?" he asked, examining Tyray with cold, unblinking eyes as they slowly walked up the block. Tyray knew exactly what he was talking about, whether he had used the gun. Bones had warned him about the gun the day he had sold it to him. "Boy, you got a choice to make. This ain't on my hands," he had said. "If you take that dude out, his face is going to be with you until the day you die. Be the last face you see at night before you go to sleep. Be the last face you see before you die." Tyray had ignored him at first, but later, when he stared at Darryl in the alley, he started to understand. "No," Tyray admitted, suddenly feeling embarrassed. "You get scared?" Bones asked with a cold smile, ketchup dripping from his fingers. "Nah, I wasn't scared. It ain't like that," Tyray blurted, his voice louder than he had meant it to be. "I just couldn't do it," he admitted. "'Cause you was scared," Bones repeated with a raspy chuckle. "No, I wasn't." "So what was it then?" "Man, what's your problem?" Tyray yelled. "When I saw him lying there crying, I couldn't, okay? And then He paused and remembered the final instant he had turned the gun on himself instead. "Look, I don't want to talk about it. I'm late. I ain't got time for this." "Boy, look at my face. I'm dying. Don't talk to me about time," he barked, and he began coughing, a fit that ended with him spitting something rust-colored onto the curb. Tyray cringed. He didn't want to be near the sickly man with his wheeze and piercing eyes, and yet he couldn't just walk away. "Years ago, I'd have busted on you for being a coward. Today, I'd say you was just being smart," Bones said, squinting at Tyray as if he were trying to read something he couldn't quite see. "I'm kind of surprised, though. You had that look in your eye. I thought you was going to go through with it." He paused, taking a heavy breath. "That's all right. I don't need no more blood on my hands." He tossed a fry aside as if it disgusted him. "Not with where I'm going." Tyray squirmed. "Man, I'm sorry," he said, "but I really need to go. My dad already grounded me, and I was supposed to be home 20 minutes ago." A car passed by, and Bones crumpled up the bag of French fries. "That's right. Old Gil Hobbs will get mad if you're late, right? That man's got issues, but I can't blame him after what he's been through," he said knowingly. Tyray wasn't sure what he meant. Then Bones's face suddenly grew serious. "You seen your brother since he got locked up?" he asked. Tyray froze. Bones's cheeks were slightly sunken, and his hands were gnarled with veins, but his eyes smoldered with invisible fire. Warren had mentioned him a few times long ago, but Tyray hadn't expected this skinny man to bring up Warren. Did he know something about what Londell said? "Nah, why?" Bones stared at him for a few seconds. "You see him, let him know I was asking about him, you hear me? Tell him I'm sorry." Something about Bones's voice was strange, the way his last words hung in the air. "He ain't in trouble, is he?" Tyray asked, unable to hide his thoughts. "Londell James said—" "Londell James? What you talking to him for?" Bones's face tightened into a sneer. For an instant, Tyray saw his teeth, yellowed and crooked. They almost looked like fangs. Tyray explained how he had been jumped and how Jupiter stole Warren's iPod. He also mentioned how Londell threatened him. "I don't know how he got out of jail so quick," Tyray grumbled. "Everyone knows what he did." Bones scowled and shook his head as if Tyray had said something silly. "'Cause ain't nobody want to snitch on him. Everybody's too scared, so the police can't do nothing. You got any sense in your head, you'll stay away from him too," Bones said. "Dude robbed me twice," Tyray grumbled, "and he knows something about Warren." "So what you gonna do about it?" Tyray hated that he had no good answer. He shrugged in frustration. "Nothing, I guess." "That's right. You stay away from the James brothers, you hear me? You got something none of us got. You better keep it," Bones said. "Man, what are you saying?" Bones shook his head. "Visit your brother and ask him. He'll tell you. Don't forget to tell him what I said," he huffed, walking down the street toward the corner. "Man, I can't just go see him. My dad won't let me. Besides, I hear you gotta have an adult with you and some paperwork or something like that." Bones stopped and turned back to him. Tyray thought he heard him cursing under his breath. From a distance, his face looked almost like a skull, and yet the skinny man was scratching his chin thoughtfully as if he was planning something. "You want to go, you meet me next Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, right out here at the bus station. I'll get you there." "For real?" Tyray asked. Bones slipped around the corner without a word, disappearing like a shadow. Chapter 6. "Where is he?" Dad barked. Tyray braced himself as he stood outside the front door. He could hear his father yelling as he reached the cement slab driveway alongside their house. Tyray wished he could just keep walking. Instead, he forced himself to open the door. He grabbed the half-completed application from his pocket just to prove to his father where he was. "Boy, you better have a good excuse," Dad hollered. "You think we were kidding when we told you what time to be home?" "No," Tyray said. His head felt ready to burst with thoughts of Warren, Lark, and Londell. Now Dad was just adding to the pressure. He rose from the couch and approached Tyray. "Give him a chance to explain, Gil," said Mom, looking worried. "I'm tired of giving him chances. Seems the only time he ever listens is when I knock some sense into him. I'm beginning to think that's what he needs right now." Tyray shook his head in frustration. He couldn't stand the sound of Dad's yelling. Before he could explain where he had been, he heard the angry reply escape his lips. "Man, that's all you ever want to do anyway," Tyray mumbled. "What's that?" Dad asked, stepping closer, fire in his eyes. "You got something to say to me, boy? Go on, let's hear it." Tyray knew if he said anything, Dad would slap him. He had done it before, but with everything on his mind, he almost didn't care. Besides, he knew what Dad thought. For days, Dad's words had ricocheted through Tyray's mind like bullets. "He ain't no good. He ain't nothing but trouble." "Why don't you both just sit down?" Mom suggested. Tyray knew he should listen, but he couldn't. He had tried to do the right thing, find a way to pay back Lark, get a job, visit his brother. But Dad didn't care. He just kept coming. "No, I don't want to sit down," Tyray said, his heart pounding. "Excuse me?" Part of Tyray was scared, but another part couldn't hold back his frustration. "All you ever do is yell, Dad. No matter what I do, it ain't good enough. You want to hit me? Go ahead. There ain't no use talking to you anyway." "Gil," Mom protested, "don't do this." Smack! The back of Dad's hand swung round and caught Tyray in the mouth, snapping his head to the side and splitting his lip. "What else you gotta say?" Dad barked. "You see?" Tyray cried out in outrage, trying to raise his arms to block him. "You don't even want to listen. Crack!" Gil Hobbs struck again, a bit harder this time. Tyray hit the wall and fell to the ground, dropping the paper. He wanted to raise his fists at his father, but it was as if invisible chains held his arms down. It was a line he couldn't cross. "I hate you, Dad," Tyray cried, tears of rage and hurt in his eyes. "I hate you." "That's enough, Gil," Mom screamed, darting between them. "How do you know it's enough, huh? Maybe if I'd have been tougher on Warren, he wouldn't be where he is now," Dad huffed. He tried to step around her, but she held him, locking her arms around his. He's had enough, Mom repeated, looking Dad in the eye. It wasn't right when your daddy did it to you, so why are you doing it to him? Dad ignored her comment and glared at Tyray. You don't have to like me, but you will respect me, he hollered over Mom's shoulder. And you will follow the rules of this house, you understand? For a second, no one moved. The dining room was silent, except for the sound of Dad's breathing. It was like the alley after the gun blast. Tyray tasted blood in his mouth and saw tiny red droplets on his cast. He nodded. Dad took a deep breath and stepped outside. Mom rushed to the kitchen and put some ice cubes in a towel. She handed it to Tyray and tried to help him up, but he shrugged away from her. Don't touch me, he fumed, angry at the tears in his eyes. Tears for all that was wrong between them, for all that was wrong with his life. He escaped to his bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Hours later, as the darkness gradually swallowed his room, Tyray's mind filled with one thought. He wished Daryl had been a little slower, that the bullet had not missed. Tyray crept through the dark alley once again. The rain was falling, coating everything in a silvery sheen. The gun was back in his hand, heavy and warm. And then he heard it, the thud of a car door closing, the low cough of an engine starting not far away. He jogged toward the sound. It had to be close, just up ahead. The sound of the engine grew louder. He could smell the exhaust in the air. He turned the corner and was blinded by headlights, but he knew what it was. The golden Nissan. Its lights cut the darkness like the flashlights in his room a year ago. As his eyes adjusted, he could just make out the silhouette of the driver, and he noticed the dim orange glow of a cigarette. He was sure it was Londell behind the wheel. Somewhere far off he heard a woman cry, but he didn't care. He glanced to his left and realized he was on the blacktop lot near Bluford High School. Lark and Jamie were sitting on the front steps of the school watching him. Daryl was there too. Mr. Mitchell shook his head as if he was disappointed. To his right, the lot stretched out before him, pocked with shallow holes just like the ones he and Dad had searched to find the gun. Suddenly, the car's wheels chirped on the asphalt. The Nissan lurched toward him. He tried to raise the gun, but his movement was slowed somehow. It was like the night in the alley. He just wasn't fast enough. Already the car bore down on him. He glanced on either side, but there was nowhere to run. No! He screamed, but the car did not stop. In horror, he felt the impact of the sedan striking his legs. His torso came crashing down on the hood. His cast shattered. Lark's writing broke apart, and for an instant Tyray saw the driver, his lips pressed tight together, his eyes glaring with anger. It wasn't Londell. It was Dad. Tyray screamed. He sat upright in his bed, covered in sweat. He turned to his clock and saw the red numbers. It was 3:17 in the morning, and his window was dark except for the glow of a street light filtering through the corners of his shade. The house was silent for a moment, but then Tyray heard the shuffle of footsteps. A second later, there was a click, and his room was flooded with harsh electric light. Tyray squinted. "What's wrong?" Dad asked. "I heard you hollering." "Nothing. I just had a bad dream, that's all," he said with a shiver. The memories of their argument flooded back into his mind. "You sure you're all right? What'd you dream about?" Tyray didn't know what to say, not after the fight they'd had or what he had seen moments earlier. He kept picturing his father's steely expression as he drove the car right through him. "Nothing," Tyray said. "Just something dumb about school." His father took a deep breath and shook his head. In the harsh light, his face seemed gray and older. Bags hung from beneath his eyes, and there were creases in his forehead. He looked as if he hadn't slept at all. Had he even gone to bed? "It's late. Go on back to sleep," he said, clicking off the light. The floor creaked as his father stepped back into the hallway. Tyray heard him pause for a moment and sigh quietly, before going back to his room and closing the door. Tyray stretched back into his bed and tried to erase the nightmare from his mind. In the darkness, he could still see Dad's glare as he made the car destroy him. The next morning, Tyray waited in his room until Dad left for work. At breakfast, he sat motionless and dazed, barely touching his cereal. He could feel Mom staring at him, but his thoughts kept racing. "Your father didn't mean what he said last night," Mom said finally as Tyray stared into his bowl. "I don't care," he replied, stirring the milk and then pushing the whole bowl away. Londell, Lark, Warren, Bones. Their faces flashed through his mind like lightning from an approaching storm. "Tyray, you have to eat, baby," she said, nudging it back in front of him. "Don't call me baby," Tyray snapped and shoved the bowl with his cast, sending it to the floor. Mom's eyes grew wide in surprise. "Tyray!" "I don't want it, okay?" Tyray hissed. "I don't want nothing from any of you." "Now you pick that up, you hear me?" Mom yelled. Tyray's head was throbbing. He felt an urge to hit her, to strike back at everything that was wrong in his life, though it wasn't her fault. Instead, he turned away and put his face in his hands so he wouldn't have to see her. His pulse pounded like a hammer in his head. "I'm going, Ma. None of y'all are going to stop me." "Going where?" "To see Warren," he replied, throwing his hands down and staring her in the eye. "I need to see him." His mother shook her head as if she didn't know what to do with him. "Is that what this is all about, Warren?" Tyray clenched his jaw and fought back the urge to scream. There was too much happening. He was being pulled in too many directions, and there was no way he could explain it all to her. He was sure she was going to lecture him. If she did, he would lose it. Rage boiled in his chest, ready to explode. Mom didn't say a word. Instead, she stared at him for several long seconds. "How you going to get in there, huh?" she asked finally. "You need papers, Tyray, and an adult, and—" "I don't know," he boomed, cutting her off and banging his cast on the table. "But I'll figure it out, okay? I got no choice, Ma. You hear me? I gotta do this," he insisted, turning away from the pained look on her face. He knew he could never mention Bones. Tyray felt his mother staring at him. He heard her pick up the spilled bowl and place it in the sink. Then she sighed wearily, as if something inside had just given up. "Come on," she said, her voice different from before. "You'll need this if you go." Mom led him down the hall. He stood at the edge of his parents' bedroom while she grabbed a small silver key from her dresser. Then she opened her closet. Inside was a gray metal file cabinet he had never noticed. She opened it with the key and pulled out something bundled in a plastic bag and placed it next to her while she rifled through some papers. Tyray almost fell over. He was almost certain what was in the bag. It was the gun. His gun. It had to be. Dad hadn't turned it in. He didn't say a word as Mom dug through a thick stack of papers and official-looking envelopes. A second later, she pulled out 2 sheets and handed them to him. He glanced at the first one. "This note is to certify that Tyray Hobbs is an approved visitor for Warren Hobbs, inmate number 321629 at Cliffside Correctional Facility." The second was a stamped sheet with the words "Visitation Form." It was dated from last year. At the bottom were a number of names, printed in Warren's handwriting. Gilbert Hobbs, Elaine M. Hobbs, Tyray Hobbs, Chantel Williams. Tyray was surprised to see Chantel's name on the sheet. Tyray hadn't heard anyone mention her name since Warren was arrested. "Take these, your school ID, and this," Mom said firmly, handing him a copy of his own birth certificate. "Visiting hours are weekends only. They won't let you in any other time. When you see him, tell him we love him. You hear me?" she added, wiping her eyes. Tyray nodded. He was speechless. "Now go," she said, turning away from him. "Don't be late for school." Chapter 7. Everyone, please clear your desks, announced Mr. Mitchell. It's time for a quiz. The class groaned. Tyray slouched back into his chair and stared at his worn copy of Lord of the Flies. He hadn't read past the second page. The last thing he wanted to do was read about a bunch of rich white kids in some jungle. What did that have to do with anything? Tyray's face still ached from his fight with Dad. His mind kept racing over his talk with Mom, the prison forms hidden in his room, and Warren sitting alone in a cell a few hours away. The quiz landed on his desk. Tyray wrote his name and glanced at the questions he knew he couldn't answer. Next to him, Tasha silently signaled to Janelle for an answer to item 2. Janelle mimed answer choice C, careful to keep an eye on Mr. Mitchell. They were cheating. Tyray had seen it countless times and never cared, but now, after everything, it suddenly annoyed him. Tasha and her friends would get another good grade while he would get an F. Then they'd act as if they were perfect and he was a loser. But it was all fake. "You ain't no better than me," he mumbled to himself. At the bottom of the sheet were 3 essay questions. He had to answer one. Number 1. Why do you think everyone picked on Piggy? Explain. Number 2. Even though they know it's wrong, many join in the violence. Why? Number 3. Would today's students behave the same as those in Lord of the Flies? Explain your answer. Tyray's head throbbed. He was weary from not sleeping. He knew there was no point trying to write about a book he didn't read, but the words "join in the violence" caught his eyes. Many sitting around him had been there in the cafeteria the day he and Darryl fought. He remembered the looks in their eyes as they cheered, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" After Tyray's wrist cracked and started swelling, some snickered as if it was all a joke. They were quick to laugh again when he tried to give Lark the iPod. Some might even have seen his fight with Jupiter and Keenan, though no one bothered to help. "I don't need no book to tell me about violence. I've been there," he thought to himself. Tyray grabbed his pen and jotted some words on his quiz sheet. "People in this school are either cowards or animals. The animals travel in packs, ready to gang up on you if they think it'll get them something. Popularity, reputation, whatever. It don't matter that it's not right because it gets them what they want. The cowards are people that join the animals because they are scared. They're afraid to stand up to them because they know if they do, they'll be called a snitch or get jumped next time. I don't want to be neither. Any book that says this is realistic." Tyray turned in his paper and slumped in his seat as Mr. Mitchell waited for everyone to finish. The teacher glanced at Tyray's sheet as he collected the rest of the quizzes. He then circled to the side of the room. Tyray knew by the look on his face that he was about to start another one of his discussions. Tyray rolled his eyes. "Okay, so imagine you're on the island with the boys in this book. They begin to pick on the younger kids and then turn on Piggy. What do you think you would do? Be honest." The class was silent. Tyray noticed Tasha and Janelle whisper something about Piggy being overweight. Then they both looked at Harold. The heavy boy was motionless in his seat, as if he was trying to hide. "Well, for one, I wouldn't be going around cutting pigs' heads off and smearing blood everywhere. That's just nasty," said Jamie. A few students mumbled in agreement. Tyray was surprised. The description didn't sound like any book Mr. Mitchell would assign. He glanced at the cover. An odd white face peered back at him. Leaves and branches were in his hair. Something next to the face was stained red. It looked like a body. "For real, I think these kids are messed up, Mr. Mitchell," said Rodney from the other side of the room. "Ain't none of us psycho like that." He snuck a quick glance at Tyray. "Well, maybe one of us is," whispered Janelle under her breath to Tasha. Tyray knew it was an insult aimed at him, though he wasn't sure Janelle meant for him to hear it. He wanted to say something back to her, but he knew it would turn ugly if he did. Instead, he scratched at his cast and noticed Lark's writing. It had already faded slightly. T's promise. He imagined himself paying her back, looking at Lark's face as he handed her the money he had stolen. Maybe her smile would light up like it sometimes did when they talked, or maybe whatever haunted her would stop for a while. Either way, he would finally do something good, No matter what Dad said or his classmates thought, he held on to the image like a lifeline. "Tyray?" It was Mr. Mitchell's voice. He looked up to see the teacher staring at him. "Huh?" Some people snickered. Tasha smirked. "You're on the island. You see kids roughing up Piggy," he explained. "You think it's realistic that young people would behave this way?" Tyray gazed at the teacher. He was certain Mr. Mitchell knew he hadn't read the book. Was he trying to embarrass him? The entire class seemed to stop breathing as they waited for his answer. It was almost as if they wanted him to mess up, as if they were eager for another chance to kick him while he was down. "Man, I don't know about no island," he huffed, feeling their stares crawl over him. "But I know people in school who do that. Some are here right now. Happens every day. Everybody knows it, but they just keeping quiet because they don't want to snitch," he said, thinking of Tasha's quiz and then of Londell James. People everywhere were doing something wrong, and other people knew it but said nothing. "I hope you ain't acting like you're any better," Jamie said, looking over at Darryl. "Not after what you've done." "Easy, Jamie," Mr. Mitchell said, cautioning her. Tyray sat up in his seat, ignoring the teacher. "I ain't never said I didn't do nothing wrong, but some of you are acting like you're saints or something," he snapped. "Who's ganging up now, huh? But it's all good. I don't need no little gang to hide behind," he said, unable to hide the bitterness in his voice. "I don't need none of y'all." The class hushed as if Tyray's words sucked the air out of the room. Jamie's jaw dropped as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Tyray didn't care. He leaned back in his chair and stared down at his cast. Mr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "I never said talking about this would be easy, but it's important. It's how we learn from each other, so I ask that you show each other some respect. Now, according to Tyray, what we're reading isn't that different from our own school," he said, holding his copy of Lord of the Flies. "What do the rest of you think? Is Bluford that rough?" The room was quiet for several moments. Tyray squirmed, waiting for the class to end. Finally, Darryl Mercer spoke up. "It can be," he said, eyeing Tyray, "but not usually in class. It's what happens after class or in, like, the bathroom or the gym." "Nah, it's rough everywhere," added Harold without turning his head. Tyray had hardly ever heard him speak in class, even when other kids teased him. Mr. Mitchell asked for more people to comment, but Tyray stopped listening. He'd had enough. All the talk didn't fix his problems at home. It didn't free Warren or stop Tyray from getting robbed. It didn't keep guys like Jupiter and Londell from messing up his neighborhood. It was all just a waste of time. Ring! The bell blasted overhead. Tyray bolted from his desk, eager to leave. "Tyray, can I speak with you a minute?" Mr. Mitchell asked, stopping him before he could reach the door. "Not again," Tyray thought. "I don't want to be late, Mr. Mitchell," he said, pretending to care about algebra. The teacher stared at him. Tyray was sure he saw the marks on his cheek, his swollen lip. There was no way he could hide them. "You okay?" he asked finally. "Yeah, why are you asking?" Tyray grumbled, throwing the question back at him. "Look, I need to get to my next class. I got a quiz today." "Tyray, is there something else going on at home or—" "Like what? What you think is going on, Mr. Mitchell?" Tyray snapped, looking at the teacher in his blue button-down shirt, khaki pants, and jungle print tie. Tyray took a step toward the door. "You're not alone, Tyray. There are people to talk to, like I mentioned before." "Just shut up, Mr. Mitchell," he wanted to say. "What do you know about anything?" His eyes locked on the stack of papers on the teacher's desk. Tasha's paper was on top. Mr. Mitchell had written the words, "See me," in the corner in red ink. "I don't need to talk to anyone, okay? I just need to get out of here," Tyray blurted. "And go where?" Tyray shrugged. Why wouldn't the teacher just leave him alone? "I hate to break it to you, Tyray, but there are a lot of places in the world worse than school. I hope you never have to see them. Ask Warren. I know he'd agree with me." Tyray looked up at the mention of his brother. "What you know about him?" "I remember him well, Tyray. He was a smart young man with a promising future. The last thing he'd want is for his little brother to end up where he is now. School isn't perfect, but it's the best way to avoid that path. But you gotta do your part, Tyray. I can't do it for you.
Man, whatever, Tyray replied, gently kicking the edge of the desk.
Look, Tyray, we don't get to pick the hand we're dealt, but we still have to play our cards. You hear me? You got choices. Every day you're making them, whether you know it or not. Right now you're choosing to fail my class, and you're pushing everyone away. I suggest a different choice. Do your work in here. Talk to someone. Your description of this school isn't right. Not everyone here is mean. Some of them would be friends with you in a second if you let them. The teacher looked at Tyray's cast as he spoke. Find good people and open up to them. For an instant, Tyray imagined school without everyone hating or looking down at him. He couldn't believe that path was open to him. It was for Darryl with his wrestler friends, or maybe even Harold with his grandmother who watched him like a hawk. But not for me, Tyray thought, remembering what Dad had said. Man, you don't get it, Tyray answered, trying to clear the image from his mind. I don't need them. I don't care what they think. I hear you, Tyray. I get it. You don't need anyone, right? He asked, crossing his arms and nodding for a second. But let's be real. How's that working for you? Tyray hated Mr. Mitchell's question. What did he know? He wasn't there on the playground years ago when Tyray was an awkward kid people used to tease. He wasn't there last year when Warren was dragged out or when Dad's anger spread like cancer in the house. He wasn't humiliated at school, robbed on the street, or worried if his brother was okay. He never stood in a misty alley holding a gun to his own head. It was all a tangled knot Tyray couldn't unravel, let alone describe to his teacher. And yet he couldn't shake Mr. Mitchell's question. How's that working for you? Sitting there in the empty classroom, Tyray knew it wasn't working. Not at all. He had no real friends and no one to talk to. The sad truth came crashing down on him in heavy waves. Tyray couldn't stand it. Yo, I'm sorry, Tyray said, trying to mask the pain with a smile. Maybe you help Darryl with what you're saying, but that don't work on me. I ain't like him, okay? Just 'cause you came to my house don't mean nothing. No disrespect, but you don't know jack about me, Mr. Mitchell, Tyray said, clenching his jaw to hide his emotion. Sadness filled his chest until it felt as if it would burst. No one does, he almost added. Overhead the bell rang and students lined up in the hallway outside the classroom. Tyray took a deep breath and turned away just as Mr. Mitchell handed him a hall pass. It was already filled out with his name and his next class. I might know a bit more than you realize, Mr. Mitchell said. Remember, you got choices, you hear me? It doesn't have to be this way, Tyray. It can change. Tyray crumpled the pass and stormed out, his eyes stinging as he left. After school, Tyray sat in his empty living room. Mr. Mitchell's words kept replaying in his mind. You have choices. Tyray didn't see any. Trying to escape his thoughts, he grabbed the remote and flipped on the TV. Two men fought each other in a cage, kicking and punching as a crowd roared. He pressed the remote. Click. A grainy image showed a bomb crash through the chimney of a building. An instant later, the structure became a fireball. Click. Two women on a talk show were screaming at each other. Suddenly, one stood up, cursed the other, and slapped her face. The audience hooted and cheered. Tyray switched off the TV, his broken wrist tingling. He wished he could escape the house, just as Lark said, but there was no way out. He heard the rumble of Dad's truck outside. Quickly, he retreated to his room as the front door unlocked. Tyray heard the familiar slap of his father's keys on the table. Tyray, he called. You here? Yeah, he hollered back. Come here, Dad said. I want to talk to you about something. Tyray felt his pulse quicken. What if Dad found out that Mom had given him papers to visit Warren? What if Mr. Mitchell called and told him about his falling grades? He braced himself as he walked into the hallway. Why didn't you tell me about this?
His father was holding a piece of paper. It was Tyray's half-completed application from Fatburger. He had dropped it when he and Dad fought. Tyray shrugged. You never gave me a chance, he replied. His father stared at the paper as if the words stung him somehow. You serious about working? It's the first time I ever heard you say you wanted a job. Yeah, I'm serious. I gotta pay back Mom, remember? He replied. He didn't want Dad to know about Lark. But it don't matter. They ain't gonna hire me. Why not? He explained what Selma said to him about his broken wrist. Well, Selma don't know what she's talking about. Huh? I know the owner over there. Known him for years. Sometimes my crew goes there for lunch. Anyway, your mother and I talked last night, and I called him today. He said he could use help weekends. You want to work? You be there at 9:30 next Saturday for training, Dad said. For real? Tyray couldn't believe his father's words. Yeah, Dad nodded. But you're still grounded. This is for work only, and just on Saturdays, you hear? If I see any nonsense from you or your grades slip, we're going to drop this real quick, understand? Don't worry, Tyray replied, glancing down at his cast.
Chapter 8.
Ouch! Tyray yelled. Droplets of hot grease from the fryer at Fatburger splattered on his wrist, sending needles of pain into his arm. That's the third time today, said Dominic, the 19-year-old shift manager who had trained him since he showed up at 9:30. Here, he said, throwing him a towel. Tyray wiped the grease from his arm and noticed the tiny spots it left on his cast. It's 'cause you rush too much. Like I said this morning, you gotta slow down so you don't splash, unless you want your arm to be as cooked as them fries. Man, you try doing this one-handed, Tyray said, tossing the towel next to the sink. The truth was he had trouble paying attention because his mind was on tomorrow. He still hadn't figured out how he would get Dad to let him go to Cliffside. Hey, I told you to stay on the register, but you asked to work back here. Don't go making excuses. You're lucky you even got a job, Dominic said. If I was lucky, my wrist wouldn't be broke, Tyray wanted to say, but he knew to keep his mouth shut. There was no way he would admit he chose to work at the Friar so he wouldn't have to face people from Bluford. Seeing them from the Friar was bad enough. How'd you break your wrist again? I told you, I slipped in the cafeteria at school, Tyray said, careful to hide details about Darryl. That's not what I heard, said a voice behind him. Tyray turned to see Selma. She had barely said a word to him the whole morning. Why? What did you hear? Dominic asked. Yeah, tell us, said Nitsa, another girl who worked at the registers. Oh my God, I can't believe it, cut in a voice from behind him. Tyray turned around to see Shanetta Green and Natalie Wallace, two older girls he recognized from Bluford. Tyray Hobbs is flipping burgers. Look at him, Shanetta howled, snapping a picture with her camera phone. Yo, Tyray, that cast come with fries? She teased. Yeah, Ty, do they sell that cast supersize? Joked Natalie. The two girls cackled so loudly other customers stared at them. Tyray wanted to tell them off, but he knew he couldn't. He glanced at Lark's writing to stay calm. Not so fun when they dishing it out at you, is it? Selma said with a knowing smile. Tyray grunted and returned to the fryer, removing the cooked fries from the grease and draining them in a tray before sprinkling salt on them, like Dominic showed him. For a second, he imagined spitting into Shanetta's fries or dumping a bucket of grease on her lap. Finally, the noisy girls grabbed their food and sat down. So, what did you hear, Selma? Nitsa asked after they left. Dominic turned his head to listen, even as he rang up a customer's order. Tyray braced himself. He expected the rest of the crew to laugh at him when she told the truth, but instead, Selma gave Tyray a quick glance. Nah, I was just playing. I don't know nothing about it, she said. Girl, why you always playing? Nitsa complained, as if she was disappointed. Selma changed the subject and walked back to her register. But later, just as his shift ended, she walked by and whispered, You owe me. Owe you for what? He asked. Not telling on you, she said with a grin. I heard about how you broke your hand, but I figure since you working here now, maybe if I kept quiet, you could cover a shift for me one day. I hate working on Sundays. Tyray's eyes widened. Maybe one day he would cover her shift, but he had something to do first, and she had just given him an idea how to do it. He almost hugged Selma right there as the plan formed in his head, a way to get to Cliffside.
You sure they need you tomorrow? Dad asked. An extra day so soon?
Tyray stretched the truth. It was dangerous, but he had no choice. Yeah, this girl Selma called out, so there's short staff tomorrow. You can call Dominic and ask him if you want to, Tyray explained. Dad studied him for a few seconds. Mom said nothing, but Tyray felt her watching him. I told him I was grounded, but he wanted me to ask just in case.
What did I tell you about working? Saturdays only, remember? Dad grumbled. Tyray knew what to do next. You know what, Dad? Forget it. I knew you were going to say this. I'll just call and cancel.
He grabbed the phone, pretending to call Dominic. Just then, Mom's voice cut in. Come on, Gil, she said. If they need help and he wants to work, why not let him? It's only going to be for a few hours.
See, there you go again, contradicting me. It ain't no wonder he don't listen.
But it's work, Gil. How many times have you worked late because someone called out? Besides, he could be doing a lot worse than working a few extra hours.
His father rubbed his temples. Fine, but you be back here by 6 o'clock, Dad growled. And if I find out you were somewhere outside that burger joint, you're going to be in the worst trouble of your life. I ain't playing with you. You hear me?
Tyray struggled to hide his excitement. He almost wanted to thank his mother for taking his side. He wondered if she knew what he planned to do. The next morning, as he was heading out the door, Mom stopped him. Here, she whispered, making sure Dad couldn't see her. She pressed a $20 bill and a small envelope into his hand. Warren's name was written on it. Tyray realized she knew exactly where he was going and that she had lied to help him get out. He wished she could join him, that there was no need to lie, no angry divide that cut through their house. For an instant, he almost yelled out in frustration, but she squeezed his arm and quickly turned away. Tyray raced out the door, carrying the money and the papers inside his sweatshirt. He headed down the block as if he was going to Fatburger, glancing back until he was sure his father wasn't watching him. Bones was waiting near where he had sold Tyray the gun weeks earlier. He wore faded black jeans and a ragged t-shirt beneath a denim jacket that hung loose from his thin shoulders. He sipped coffee from a small paper cup cradled in his veiny hands. For a second, he reminded Tyray of one of the homeless people who lived beneath the highway overpass not far away. Right on time, boy. Let's do this, Bones said with a crackling voice. He began walking, and Tyray was surprised at how quickly the skinny man moved, weaving between cars and crossing busy streets as if he didn't care what happened to him. Ain't every day someone like me tries to get back into a prison, Bones grumbled, fighting off a cough as they reached the bus stop across from Superfoods. The bus stop was a plexiglass shell scribbled with magic marker. On one side, a black and silver movie poster announced that Moonlight was coming to theaters soon. Tyray remembered what Lark said and shook his head. Inside, on the metal bench, sat a woman with braided hair and a small boy who looked to be in preschool. She watched him and Bones warily. Come here, Tavon, she said, yanking the child closer to her. Tyray imagined what they must look like together when he noticed the boy's eyes locked on his cast. Stop staring, that ain't nice, the woman scolded. Bones smiled, his teeth crooked and yellow in the morning light. What's up, little man? He said, putting a hand out so the boy could hit it. Come on, give me some, he urged. The little boy slapped it, and Bones chuckled with delight. That's what I'm talking about, he said before his voice broke into a violent cough. The boy jumped back into the woman's arms as Bones fought to control himself. Tyray stepped away and scanned the street, hoping the bus would arrive soon. Instead, in the distance, he spotted two people heading towards Superfoods. One of them was Harold Davis from his English class. He recognized his bulging frame 2 blocks away. Next to him was Cindy Gibson, another freshman at Bluford. Tyray couldn't believe they were out together, but just then something else caught his eye. A gold Nissan with chrome wheels and a slate-tinted windshield. It whipped by and cut into the grocery store lot. As soon as the car stopped, Londell got out and headed inside.
Jupiter and Keenan stepped out, but didn't go in the store.
Tyray clenched his fists. What were they doing? Why were they always hanging out so close to his block? He pictured Londell's cold smirk and felt an urge to rush over to his car. So what if he got beat up? At least he would get his chance to hit back. That's more than what anybody else did about them. Cowards and animals, he thought to himself. I don't want to be neither. Come on, Bones interrupted. His eyes were on the Nissan too. Let's go. Tyray heard the rumble of a bus approaching. The woman next to him stood up and guided Tavon forward. Within seconds, the bus hissed to a stop in front of them. Tyray stepped inside and grabbed a seat where he could watch the lot. Bones sat right in front of him as the engine groaned and the bus lurched forward. Through the glass, the golden Nissan sparkled like a piece of fake jewelry. 20 years ago, that was me, Bones said, pointing at the sedan. The OG, old school. I had so much swagger you couldn't fit me in that car. Londell's father was the same way. We grew up in the projects together. We had each other's back for a time, but that ain't enough out here, he scoffed. See what respect on the street gets you? You either end up dead, in jail, or alone. Me, I've had 2 out of 3, and the third is coming quick. As for Julius James, he's already gone. His kids are following the same path, but you, maybe not. Tyray turned from the window and looked at the skinny man. He couldn't help but notice the cord-like veins in his wiry neck, the papery skin that covered his face. He realized he was staring at Bones the way Tavon had stared at his cast. Time's always going forward on us. We can't never go back and undo what we did. If we could, man, the things I'd change. Bones's voice cracked, and he turned away as the streets faded into a blur. Nearly 2 hours later, Tyray spotted the exit sign for Cliffside Correctional Facility. Bones had guided Tyray through 2 bus transfers, but otherwise ignored him. Tyray's legs were stiff as he stepped off the bus and faced a massive stone wall the color of dirty cardboard. On top stretched an endless coil of silvery wires studded with tooth-like barbs. Tyray cringed, thinking of Warren trapped behind it. This way, Bones said, leading him to a steel door with a wired glass window. A sign above it read, Visitor Entrance. A small crowd followed them, including Tavon and his mother. The boy looked exhausted. Where's Daddy? He whined, tugging at her arm. I want Daddy. Behind her stood an older woman, her hair mostly gray and her back hunched as if she was carrying some invisible weight. Get in line, Bones directed. I'll stay with you until they let you through. You ain't going inside? Tyray asked. No, this is your visit, not mine, Bones replied. Besides, you don't want to see me right now, but tell him what I said and tell him I brought you here too. That's gotta count for something. They joined the line of visitors that led to an imposing steel counter as tall as Tyray's chest. Behind it were several uniformed officers, their faces stern and serious. When Tyray got to the front, an officer asked him for his paperwork and ID. He handed over everything Mom had given him. The officer studied the papers carefully. Warren Hobbs didn't indicate to us that a visitor was coming today, the guard said. You're supposed to have a parent with you, too. His parents couldn't be here today, Bones chimed in. I'm an old friend of the family just bringing the boy to see his brother. They ain't seen each other in a year. The prison guard eyed Bones and Tyray warily. No one told us about any of this. Please, he's my brother. It's my first time here, Tyray urged. He couldn't hide the desperation in his voice. I wanted to surprise him. Yeah, well, we don't do surprises here, the officer barked. We're going to have to check with him. Go have a seat and we'll call you. Tyray sat on an uncomfortable bench and watched as Tavon and his mother were sent through a metal detector. The boy cried out as the officers forced him to walk separately from his mother. It's okay, baby, she said over and over again. But it wasn't okay, Tyray thought to himself. No child should have to be in such a place. Next to him, Bones shook his head grimly as if he shared his thoughts. "Tyray Hobbs," called out the guard nearly a half hour later. "Step this way." Tyray walked over to the metal detector and the guard directed him through. Then another guard wearing white rubber gloves patted his chest, armpits, legs, and backside. Tyray felt strange with the man's hands all over his body.
"You got anything in there?"
the guard asked, pointing to his cast. "Just my broken hand," Tyray answered. The officer glared for a second and waved a small metal detector over his cast. Then Tyray was led down a dull cement corridor that smelled of bleach and paint. Video cameras were mounted overhead at each end. The corridor ended with a massive steel door positioned next to a glass room where two guards sat watching TV monitors. The guard next to Tyray pulled out a key and inserted it into the door. Clunk! Tyray flinched as the heavy lock clicked and the door opened with an ominous metallic groan. Inside was a bare room with simple tables. At one sat a man wearing an orange jumpsuit with the words Cliffside Correctional Facility. He held Tavon in his arms. The woman with braided hair stood at the man's side, her hands on his back, and whispered in his ear. In the far corner was another table with a broad-shouldered man whose head was almost completely shaved. His neck was ripped with muscle, and he wore the same jumpsuit, only his eyes looked just like Mom's. It was Warren.
Chapter 9.
"What you doing here, T?" Warren shouted, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. "What happened to your hand?" Tyray couldn't answer. Waves of emotion crashed through his chest. The humiliation he faced at Bluford, the loneliness he felt at home, the worry since he spoke to Londell, the sadness that overtook him in the dark alley, the relief of seeing Warren's face. It overwhelmed him, making it impossible to speak. He crossed the room in silence and embraced his brother. "It's okay, bro," Warren said, slapping his back several times. "It's okay." "Man, why'd you stop writing to me, huh?" Tyray asked, his head buried in his brother's chest, his eyes stinging with tears. "I was scared." "I'm sorry," Warren said gently, letting him go. His face was fuller than Tyray remembered, and he looked older. A jagged scar extended just above his right eyebrow. It had once been a deep gash, Tyray could see, but the wound was mostly healed now. "You okay?" Tyray asked, eyeing the scar. "What happened?" "Nothing," Warren said, shaking his head as if the topic annoyed him. "Just a scratch, that's all. Dad send you to check up on me?" "No, he don't even know I'm here," Tyray admitted, explaining how he snuck out to the prison to visit him. "Why'd you do that? You know he's going to find out, and then it's going to be trouble for you." "It can't get much worse," Tyray grumbled. "You still didn't answer me. How come you never wrote back?" Warren shook his head wearily. "Look, it wasn't about you, okay? I know Mom and Dad read what I write you, and I'm tired of lying to everybody. That's what got me into this mess, and I can't do it no more. If people can't handle the truth, then I got nothing to say to them. Not even Mom, and especially not Dad. I got no time for him." "What you mean? I never asked you to lie about nothing." "Look, T, just drop it, all right? Tell me what's going on at home and school. Give me something else to think about besides this place." "No, you can't shut me out like that. I've been worried about you and thinking the worst. I see that scar on your face. What's going on? For real, what's up?" Warren rubbed his head and sighed heavily. "You ain't a kid no more, so I guess I can tell you. But this just between you and me, you hear?" Tyray nodded, staring into his brother's unblinking eyes. "I'm a father." "What?" Tyray felt as if the world suddenly shifted and pitched forward. "Me and Chantel, remember?" Tyray recalled the visitor list and Mom's old complaints about Warren spending too much time with her. It made sense, and yet it felt wrong, too. Tyray remembered Warren doing homework at the kitchen table or playing Xbox in front of the TV before Dad came home. He couldn't imagine him being a parent. Other people had kids, but not his brother. Not now, not like this. "You serious?" Warren nodded. "When I found out she was pregnant, I freaked. There ain't no way I was going to tell Dad. I was still in school. I was supposed to be looking at colleges. How was I going to take care of a kid? So I started thinking about getting money. That's when I did the dumbest thing of my life. I listened to this dude Bones and hit that store, he whispered. The room seemed to lurch again. Bones gave you the idea? Tyray felt as if the top of his head was about to explode. You're the only one in our family that knows this, T. Check this out. Warren held out a tiny worn photograph smaller than his old iPod. A smiling baby girl with tiny pink beads in her hair looked out from it. She had Warren's eyes. That's Jada, your niece. She's almost a year old now. She's why I lift weights, why I read books, why I got my GED. I'm hoping to do right for her once I get out of here. I got 2 years left. 2 years. A niece. Tyray took a deep breath. Visiting hours end in 30 minutes, a guard announced. I know Dad can't handle it. If I have to hear another lecture on responsibility, I'ma scream. Yeah, I messed up, but I'm trying to make it right. I'm a tutor in here, Tyray. Some guys don't even know how to read, and I'm teaching them. They call me Prof because I'm their professor. If I keep it up, I might get out 6 months early for good behavior. So I'm trying. It ain't perfect, but it's all I got right now besides her. He looked at the tiny picture in his hands. Sorry I hid all this for so long, but you understand, right? Tyray nodded, dizzy with what he had learned. It all made sense. Warren's secrecy, his fight with Dad, Bones' apology. The skinny man had led Warren into trouble. Maybe he had sold him his gun, too. No wonder Bones said you wouldn't want to see him, he mumbled, anger swelling in his chest. Bones? What you doing talking to him? Tyray took a deep breath. There was no reason to lie. He brought me here. What? He's here? Now? Warren hissed. Boy, are you crazy? A guard in the corner of the room craned his neck toward them. Is there a problem, Mr. Hobbs? No, Warren said, cradling the tiny picture in his hands. Ain't no problems. He's dying, Tyray explained. Told me to tell you he's sorry, but them words ain't good enough if you ask me. Warren winced at the words and leaned forward in his chair. Man, tell me what's been going on with you, T, he said, looking at Tyray's cast. Tell me everything. Tyray's head pounded. He knew Warren had no idea what happened at school with Darryl. He wanted to tell him the truth, but he couldn't say the words. I wanted to shoot myself. Sometimes I still wish I did. They were locked tight in his throat. Instead, Tyray told the version he had told his parents, careful to keep his voice low when he mentioned the gun and Bones. Then he explained what Londell said and what made him rush to Cliffside. Warren clenched his teeth and shook his head as if what he heard pained him. Boy, are you trying to end up in here? 'Cause that's what's going to happen if you keep this up. And believe me, you don't want to be in this place. There are things that happen in here. I can't even talk about it. Warren's voice broke up. I wish I was out there to help you, bro. But you gotta listen to me. I don't care what Bones says. Stay away from him. Maybe I'd never be here if it weren't for him. I don't know. As for Londell, he's dangerous. He gave me this, Warren said, pointing to the scar over his eye. What? Tyray couldn't believe it. So it was true. Londell hadn't lied. He was here and saw me teaching people. Said I was wasting my time. When I told him about Jada, he said the only way I could afford to raise her was to work for him. I guess I acted like Dad then, Warren admitted, smiling bitterly. I couldn't take it. My baby girl deserves better than a daddy who served time and sells drugs for Londell James. I lost it and shoved him. Another mistake. Good thing a few guys got my back or it would have been even worse for me. You stay away from him. Dude's father was murdered a few years ago. He's scary. You cross him and he'll take you down in a heartbeat. His brother robbed me twice, Tyray grumbled, remembering his fight with Jupiter and how Londell had threatened him. They're hanging out all the time near Union Street. I seen him out there this morning. 10 minutes, announced the guard, cutting Tyray off. Warren leaned forward, his hands near his chest as if he was about to pass an invisible basketball. Listen, T, I'ma break this down for you quick. You're an endangered species. Coming from our neighborhood, we got a better chance ending up in jail than going to college. An old iPod don't matter. $40 ain't nothing. Whoever thinks that stuff is important ain't spent time in here. A week behind bars, and they'd trade it all back to be on the outside again. You understand? Tyray nodded as Warren continued. Get your education. Build yourself up so you never have to see a place like this. Be the one who invents the next iPod, not the one who spends all your money on it. And if you can't do it for yourself, do it for your niece who don't have her daddy because he messed up when he was standing where you are right now. Or do it for me, your brother who's failing his family because he's locked up in the joint. Warren's voice shook with sadness, anger, and regret. Tyray knew those feelings. They reminded him of his night in the alley. You ain't failing, Tyray said, trying to think of something to comfort him. You helping me, right? Just then, Tyray realized he wanted to tell his brother everything that happened with Darryl. He knew, looking in Warren's eyes, that his brother would listen and maybe even understand. But before he could say another word, the guard approached. Time to wrap it up, everyone, he announced. Tavon cried out in the distance. Listen to me, T. You still got a chance. You're still in school. Promise me you're going to make it count, Warren urged, his eyes almost desperate. Promise. The word struck Tyray, the same word Lark used, the same one emblazoned on his cast. For a second, he couldn't speak. That's it. Let's move, the guard barked, tapping Warren on the shoulder. Warren stood up, and Tyray hugged him again. For several seconds it was quiet, and Tyray wished he could just bring his brother home with him. But instead, he had to let him go. He handed him Mom's letter and watched as the guards led him away. I miss you, bro, Warren added as he turned down the corridor. Me too, Tyray said, watching him disappear behind a heavy steel door. Me too. Tyray confronted Bones on the bus home. So you sold a gun to my brother and told him to go rob a store? Bones nodded. I told you I was sorry, he said, looking skinnier than ever. He's a father now and can't raise his baby girl 'cause of you, Tyray fumed. Bones shrugged his shoulders wearily. He ain't the only one not coming home 'cause of me, he said, almost in a whisper. Tyray wanted to hit him. He pictured his fist slamming into the frail man's bony face. As sick as he was, Bones would be no match for him. And yet the thought made Tyray feel dirty inside. Man, I don't want to talk to you again. Just stay away from me, okay? Bones nodded, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. He was silent the entire ride home. Sunday night, Tyray stared at the ceiling of his bedroom, the news of the day swirling like a storm in his head. He still couldn't believe what he had learned. Warren was a father. He was an uncle. His parents didn't know. Tyray felt as if he were lying to their faces each time he saw them, and yet he was angry too. Maybe if Dad weren't so strict, Warren could have told them the truth. Maybe he wouldn't have felt so desperate and done something so stupid. Maybe he never would have ended up in jail. Tyray knew he was the same way, alone and desperate. That's what led him to make his mistakes too. Seeing Bones, stealing money, getting a gun. How's that working for you? Mr. Mitchell's question mocked him. He knew the answer just as Warren knew it as he sat month after month in prison. It wasn't working. Not at all. Knock, knock. The sound against the door startled him. You awake? It was Mom's voice. Tyray got up and opened the door. He peered back into the living room and saw Dad asleep on the couch. His mother stepped into the room and gently closed the door. So did you go? Did you see him? She asked. The question irritated him. It was another secret he was supposed to keep. Another moment where he couldn't tell the truth. He was getting sick of it. Yeah, I saw him, he said, sitting down on his mattress and crossing his arms. The bitterness he felt inside was spreading like a rash. "Well, how is he?" "He's locked up, Mom. What do you want me to say?" Tyray grumbled, careful to keep his promise to Warren. His mother stepped closer. "That's it? Did you talk to him about the argument with your father and why he won't see us?" "We didn't have a lot of time, Mom," Tyray replied, hating that he had to lie. "He's working, teaching people to read and stuff, and he looked good, like he's been hitting the weights." His mother looked confused, as if she had expected something else, something more. "Well, what did he say to you? Why hasn't he written back?" she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "You and Dad shouldn't have pushed him away. If you didn't, maybe it wouldn't be this way." "What way? What did he tell you?" "You're a grandma now, Mom." The words were on the tip of his tongue, but like so many others, he couldn't say them. "You should go visit him," he replied. "Ask him yourself, okay? I don't want to be in the middle," Tyray blurted. He turned away from her and stared at his wall. He could see Lark's writing on his cast and wanted to scratch it off. "Tyray, are you okay? Did he say something that upset you?" Mom asked. "Just talk to him, Mom, no matter what Dad says." He kept his back to her and listened as she walked out and shut the door. In the quiet darkness, he recalled what his brother had told him. Warren's final words echoed like a sad song in his mind, one he could not shake. "You're an endangered species. Get your education. Do it for me." Mr. Mitchell had practically said the same thing. In his own way, Bones said it too. Could they all be wrong? They acted as if it was so simple, as if he could just flip a switch and all his problems would go away, and he would suddenly be a perfect student. Who were they kidding? If it were so easy, why was Bones on the street? Why was Warren in jail? He felt his cast in the dark. Inside, he was supposed to be healing, and yet everything outside felt as if it was coming apart. Still, Warren's words stuck with him. "You're still in school. Promise me you're going to make it count." Hours later, still unable to sleep, Tyray turned on his light, grabbed his copy of Lord of the Flies, and flipped it open. Chapter 10. Tyray didn't talk to Mr. Mitchell or anyone in his class about what he had been doing, but each day after school he retreated to his room and read. At first he was bored with the book and its weird old-fashioned words, but then he started to wonder what was going to happen to the kids stranded on the island. Some were as young as Tavon, not much older than his niece. Tyray even stayed up late one night reading. The story grew bloodier and more violent. He shuddered when Piggy, the kid Tasha said reminded her of Harold, is killed by his classmates. "That ain't right," he whispered in the dark. But as he read, he knew in some ways it was just like the cafeteria during his fight, like the neighborhood when Jupiter jumped him, like some of his own treatment of Harold and Darryl. No wonder Mr. Mitchell assigned it, Tyray figured. At one point, Tyray had to put the book down because it bothered him so much. It was a scene where a group of boys slaughter a pig. The writer describes the spears sinking into its body, the blood spurting on the boys' hands, all of them chanting as the dying animal squeals. Some of the boys seemed to have violence in their hearts. Others were so scared that they joined in, even though they knew it was wrong. Cowards and animals, Tyray thought. Just like I said. Maybe that's how most people were, but Tyray knew he didn't want to be like that, no matter what he had done in the past or what classmates like Jamie thought about him. Tyray even wrote about it on the final test for the book 2 weeks later. When Mr. Mitchell reviewed the exam, he read aloud some of Tyray's answer. People stared as if he was from another planet, as if they couldn't believe Tyray Hobbs knew how to read or write or think. Who needs any of y'all? Tyray thought, trying to hold on to what his brother said, though he felt almost invisible at Bluford and at home. Get your education. Do it for me. But on Friday at lunch a week later, he could see that something was wrong with Lark. She didn't smile or speak when she sat next to him. Instead, she grunted, her eyes locked in another thick vampire book as if the cover could somehow shield her from the real world. She didn't even touch her lunch. "Girl, what's your problem? You ain't said a word to me yet. You okay?" he asked. Even her friends seemed concerned, eyeing her from their lunch table more than usual. "I just don't feel like talking about it, okay?" she said, flipping a page and not bothering to look at him. "Now you sound like me," Tyray mumbled. "But you always make me talk." Lark sighed and lowered the book from her face. Her eyes were puffy and bloodshot, as if she had been crying. Her sweatshirt was wrinkled, and cat fur was sprinkled across it as if it hadn't been washed in days. "Please, can you just drop it?" He had never seen her so serious. The scar above her lip was stretched thin and taut, as if it were about to snap. "But you can tell Jamie and not me," Tyray said, unable to hide his frustration.
She shrugged, avoiding his gaze.
"You know what? Fine, don't tell me. I don't even want to know." He stood up from the table with his tray. It pained him to say the words, but she was shutting him out as if it didn't matter that he cared about her, though he had never admitted it. "Wait," she said, putting her book down. "Where are you going?" "Well, since you got nothing to say to me, what am I going to say to you?" he huffed, angry at himself for snapping at her. He started to walk away. "Tyray, please don't go. Don't leave me here alone." He turned back. She seemed broken somehow. He knew her friends were watching, but they didn't matter. What struck him was the sadness in her voice. There was no way he would walk away from her now. "What is it? You can talk to me." "It's my brother, Kyle," she said. "Your brother? He's only in 7th grade, but these older boys in our neighborhood are always trying to get him to hang out. I know they're no good. I keep trying to tell him, but he don't want to listen to me. My mom's always working nights, and my dad, just forget him. I'm the only one who knows," she said, her eyes starting to glaze. "Knows what? They're selling, okay? Everyone on our street's scared, especially since the older one just got out of jail. I fought with Kyle for hours last night, but he just ignores me, says I don't understand. I found a gun in his room, Tyray. What am I supposed to do? He's my little brother." Her description snagged in Tyray's mind like skin on a rusty nail. His stomach began to sink. He knew the answer to his question before he asked it. "Where do you live?" "The corner of 43rd Street, Lark said. "Why are you asking me that?" Tyray lowered his head and cursed. That was Londell's neighborhood. The roar of the busy cafeteria suddenly seemed choked and muffled. The crowd all around him became dim and transparent. In that instant, Bluford itself seemed to fall away. In its place were the details of Lark's description. They came together in Tyray's mind like some horrible puzzle. Before she could say any more, Tyray knew exactly who was after Lark's brother. The same crew that robbed him twice. The same ones Bones had warned him about. The one who left a scar on his brother's face. "One of them drive a gold Nissan?" he asked, just to be sure. "Yeah, how'd you know that?" Boom! Tyray pounded his fist on the lunch table. The impact cracked like a gunshot in the cafeteria. Heads turned in alarm. "Tyray, why'd you do that? What's wrong?" "I know the guy your brother's messing with," Tyray replied grimly. "How?" "It's a long story," he grumbled, the danger of Kyle's situation sinking in with each passing second. "I'm scared, Tyray," Lark admitted. She stared down at her book as if she was searching for a way out. "I know they're dangerous. Thing is, I know Kyle's scared too. That's the worst part. I can see it in his eyes. He's still just a kid, you know? It shouldn't be like this." Tyray cursed under his breath. He couldn't stand the pain and worry in Lark's voice, and the thought that it was all happening again. Another family being pulled apart. Another gun ready to ruin a life. Another kid out of control, spinning toward jail, or worse. Tyray knew it all too well. He had been there and was still fighting it every day. The wounds were in his bones, the scars on his face and in his heart. We're an endangered species, just like Warren said, he thought. He hated how true it was and how weak and powerless he felt, and yet something began to gnaw at him, a spark of an idea that flared into a flame deep in his chest, something he never would have considered before his experience in the alley with Darryl. He turned and grabbed Lark's hand. I'll talk to Kyle, he said suddenly. Tomorrow night after work. For real? You do that? Lark asked. Her face lit up as if he had suddenly given her a lifeline, but then it clouded over just as quickly. Wait, you gotta be careful. You don't want to get in the middle of this. Relax, girl, he said, hiding his own worries. He knew what it was like to cross Londell, and so did Warren, but he couldn't tell Lark that, or she would never let him go. It's just a little talk, that's all. Ain't no big thing. But Tyray, it's all right, he said, feeling his broken hand tingle nervously in his cast. I got this. Tyray arrived almost an hour early at Fatburger on Saturday morning, hoping maybe he could leave before it got dark, but Dominic refused.
Sorry, T, but I need you until 6 o'clock. It's Saturday, remember?
Tyray nodded grimly. He had spent most of last night staring at the ceiling, wondering what he could say to Kyle. What worried him most was Londell finding out what he was doing. If what he planned to do worked, Tyray knew that Londell would find out tonight. Then things would probably get ugly. It's payday,
Selma announced as Tyray tossed a fresh batch of French fries into a pool of hot bubbling grease, the splatters dotting his cast.
What you got planned for this weekend? Nothing, he lied. He knew where his money was going. He had been waiting for this first paycheck since he started 2 weeks ago. Beyond that, Tyray had no idea. Londell and Jupiter stalked his thoughts. He knew they would be in his future again, soon. I'ma see that new Moonlight movie, Selma added as if she didn't care whether anyone listened. It's gonna be the bomb. It's playing tonight? He asked, remembering how Lark wanted to see it. Duh, where you been? That's like what everybody's talking about, she said. Tyray shrugged. He didn't care about the stupid movie, and yet something about it pained him. He couldn't remember the last time he had gone to the movies. That was something others did. People with friends, classmates who laughed in school and whose families were whole. He hadn't felt that way in years. Maybe never. You know Londell's going to come for you if you do this, Tyray thought. The truth haunted him all day, whispered to him between customers, mocked him as the hours melted away. Yo, you all right? You look sick or something, said Dominic at one point, breaking his thoughts. I'm fine, Tyray answered, trying to hide the worry that grew by the second. Be better once I get paid. I heard that, Selma said with a smile. At 6 o'clock, Tyray yanked off his visor and waited as Dominic slowly cashed out everyone's paychecks. He received an envelope with $97.19. He shoved the money deep into his pocket, feeling his stomach sink as he glanced out the drive-through window. The sun was already sinking low in the sky. He had to go, now.
Chapter 11.
Tyray stormed through the crowded restaurant, darting through the greasy air and the rows of tables as he moved toward the door. He had almost reached it when he heard a familiar wheeze. He looked up to see Bones at the last table near the door. A silvery burger wrapper slathered with ketchup rested in front of him. Bits of fries and a sliver of roll were all that remained of his meal. For a second, their eyes met. Man, not now, Tyray thought to himself, rushing to the door. He had to stop and wait as a woman and 2 kids walked in. Tyray could barely keep still as the kids struggled with the heavy door. He could feel Bones examining him. Instinctively, he felt the money in his pocket and then bolted out the door. Outside, the sun hung just above the horizon like an angry red eyeball. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk, and the streets were bathed in a bloody glow. Tyray hurried. Cars thundered past. Some throbbed with a thumping bass that rattled windows and shook the pit of his stomach, but he didn't care. Lark was the only one who stood by him in Bluford, the only one who had trusted him and his promise, the only one who stopped each day at school from being an unending desert. Now she needed his help. He had to get Kyle away from Londell no matter what, even if it would make him a target. Tyray turned off Union Street. He glanced at his cast. He could still see the words Lark wrote, though they were faded and stained in the dying sunlight. T's promise. That's right, he mumbled to himself, walking past a house with a busted fence and graffiti scrawled on the front wall. Somewhere behind him a dog barked, and another wheezed and growled in the distance, but Tyray kept walking. Though it was only 6 blocks from Fatburger, the neighborhood was very different. Everyone at Bluford knew that 43rd Street was rough. Sure, there were some old people and a few families, but at night they weren't out. Instead, once the sun went down, they hid inside small single-story homes with iron bars on their windows and their doors shut and locked. After dark, the area was a place where no one went unless they were looking for something they shouldn't have. Tyray had gone there the first time he wanted to buy a gun. He had no idea that was where Lark lived. Tyray reached 43rd Street and began looking for Lark's house. She had said she lived on a corner, but which one? He scanned each. At the last one stood a tiny gray house, its walls drab and peeling, a trash can sitting on the curb. Inside, the windows glowed yellow against the growing darkness. In one, Tyray spotted a large tan cat. He knew it was the right place. He walked up to the tiny porch and knocked on the door. Within seconds, he heard footsteps. Then the door opened. Lark faced him, her eyes swollen and wet from tears. "What is it? What happened?" he asked. "It's Kyle. He's over there now. I know he doesn't want to be there, but he's scared. He's afraid to tell them no, but they want him to start running for them, making deliveries. I can't call the police. What am I supposed to do?" "Where's the gun?" "I hid it so he couldn't find it. He's so upset. Thinks they're going to get mad at him and me, but I can't let him have it. He's going to hurt someone or get himself killed." Tyray snapped. He couldn't stand to see Lark so upset, and he couldn't bear the thought of Londell hurting a member of her family. First it was his brother, then him, now his only friend. It was too much. "Give it to me," he barked. Maybe it would give him protection, he thought, a chance to take back something from Londell that wasn't his, Lark's brother. "What? No, Tyray, I can't do that. I can't have something happen to you. I ain't going to use it. I'm going to get Kyle back. Please, Tyray, don't go over there. Don't do this. I can't have you getting hurt for me." "I'm going either way, but I got a better chance of coming back if you give it to me. Come on, girl," he urged. Tears streamed from Lark's eyes as she rushed back into her house. Seconds later, she came out holding a black handgun as if it disgusted and frightened her. "What are you going to do? Promise me you're coming back." Tyray slipped the gun from her hand and shoved it under the waist of his pants. Then he grabbed the envelope of money from his pocket. "Here you go," he said. "It's everything I took from you and more. It's yours. It's what I promised, remember?" "Wait, why do you sound that way? Why are you giving all this to me?" He turned away even as she kept calling his name. He had tried to hide his worry, but the words had given it away. He knew he might not come back. He wanted to pay her just in case. Tyray crossed 43rd Street and then slowed down, careful not to draw attention to himself. Parked on the curb up ahead was the golden Nissan Tyray had seen so many times. He knew eyes might be watching him as he headed up the block. He didn't have much time. His heart rattled in his chest. His stomach churned. He knew he was in over his head. He could feel it even as he stepped closer to the house. Like so many times before, the world was slipping out of control again. He knew it and wished he could pull it back, bring it back from the edge, but his feet kept moving, carrying him closer. Up ahead, he could see the familiar cracked sidewalk, the stained cement driveway, the small enclosed porch not much different than his own. Tyray reached down and felt the warm metal of the gun against his palm. His hands tingled as if invisible spiders were crawling on his fingers. He couldn't believe he was back where he had been only a month ago. He had come so far in that time. He could see it now. He had reconnected with Warren. He got a job. He was even doing a little better in school. But still, it was as if he was stuck in quicksand. A kind of gravity was pulling him down, even though he knew inside that it was wrong and dangerous and stupid. Maybe if Warren wasn't in jail, maybe if school wasn't full of people who hated him, maybe if Dad's ugly words hadn't echoed in his mind for weeks, maybe then he could stop himself. But not now. A grim momentum carried him forward. The anger at Londell, the outrage of what was happening to Lark, the frustration of what had happened to him for weeks. It drove him. He crept up the driveway that ran next to the house. Inside, lights were on. People were talking. He heard a boy's voice. He was sure it was Kyle. Tyray paused, took a last deep breath, and pulled out the weapon. Whap! A claw-like hand gripped his shoulder. Tyray jerked free and turned with the gun to see Bones. In the dim light, his face looked shadowy and hollow. "Man, what you doing here?" Tyray hissed. "Been following you," Bones wheezed, trying to catch his breath. "Knew you was in trouble. Saw it in your face," he said with a weak, raspy voice. His weary eyes focused on the gun. "Don't do this." "Man, this ain't about you. Just go home." Tyray heard the porch door open behind him. He whipped around with the gun, but Bones grabbed it. "I wasn't going to use it. Let go." Tyray snarled, trying to shake the gun free, but the skinny man clung to the weapon as if his life were at stake. With both arms, he twisted and bent Tyray's hand backward. A burning stab of pain shot into his wrist. With his other hand useless, Tyray had to let go. "What are you doing?" he screamed in outrage. Bones staggered 2 steps, stumbled, and then fell to the ground. His chest heaved as he lay on the cement. Londell stood right in front of him. He glanced once at Bones and then glared at Tyray as if the sick man wasn't even there.
"Boy, you're even dumber than your brother,"
Londell fumed. The porch door opened again and Jupiter and Keenan rushed out. Next to them stood a shorter, baby-faced boy with Lark's cheekbones. Tyray knew it was Kyle. He looked as if he was ready to throw up. "Dang, look at these two. Broken bones and skin and bones," Jupiter said as he stepped into the driveway.
"I warned you last time, but you didn't listen. Now you're done. We going for a ride. Let's go," Londell said.
Bones coughed then, making a horrific gurgling sound. Tyray could hear the fluid in his lungs as he heaved and spit onto the ground. Jupiter stopped for a second and stared at the man.
"Go on, Jupe. Throw this punk in the car,"
Londell ordered. "No!" Bones gasped, his voice almost a gargle. Amazingly, the man stood up. His mouth hung open as he gasped for air. A thin trail of fluid ran from his lip to his chin, and yet his eyes still burned with a determined fire as he stumbled closer. Londell stepped back as if he was surprised. Jupiter stood frozen. Kyle's jaw dropped.
"Bones, you like a legend out here, but this ain't about you,"
Londell said. Tyray could see a cruel glint in his eye.
"No disrespect, but I got a score to settle with this punk. You had your time. This is my time."
Bones staggered between Tyray and Londell as if he was trying to shield Tyray. "Me and your pops were friends. Had each other's backs for years. You remember, don't you?" Bones spoke barely above a whisper, stopping once to cough and spit. Londell's eyes narrowed at the mention of his father. Jupiter turned toward Bones then, too. "Bro, he don't look so good," whispered Keenan to Jupiter. "He promised me, if I needed a favor, to call him," Bones continued. "So I'm asking you, a last favor to an old friend. Tyray and this other boy, they with me. Let them go." Bones's eyes locked on Londell's. For an instant, the two stared at each other. Tyray felt glued to the driveway. He knew his own life hung in the balance. Part of him wanted to strip the gun from Bones' hand, but another part knew better. Bones was struggling to save him and Kyle, two kids he barely knew. It was a heroic gesture Tyray couldn't fully comprehend, even as he listened to each breath rattle in the man's chest. Suddenly, another violent spasm ripped through Bones' body. He collapsed to his hands and knees. The gun fell to the ground with a heavy clunk. All of them stared at it for an instant. Keenan turned away as Bones spat up a bloody glob. Jupiter gazed on as if he was witnessing an accident happen in slow motion. Kyle turned away as if he was horrified. Londell grunted and picked up the weapon, but Tyray didn't care. He rushed to Bones' side and kneeled next to him, hoping he could help in some way. "He needs an ambulance," Tyray pleaded. Bones' hands and legs twitched with each cough as he labored for air. "Please." Londell watched them for a few seconds and then turned toward his house. The older boys followed him, glancing back at Bones several times. Kyle was motionless, his unblinking eyes now fixed on Bones. "Don't either of you come back here, or you'll end up like him," Londell said. He glared at Tyray and then at Kyle before walking back inside and shutting the door. Bones lay sprawled on the cement. An ambulance came 10 minutes later, but by then it was too late. Tyray was still at Bones' side when the flashing lights first sliced the darkness. He had heard the man whisper his last words just before a coughing spell stole his final breath. "Make it count." Tyray watched as the paramedics pumped Bones' chest and wheeled him into the back of the ambulance. Kyle sat motionless on the curb nearby, his head between his knees as the door slammed shut and the vehicle raced away. The small crowd that had been drawn by the flashing lights began to disperse when someone shouted out, "Tyray! Kyle!" Tyray turned to see Lark. She ran straight to her brother's side and hugged him. The boy's eyes glistened in the streetlight, and he lowered his head into her shoulder. He looked like a young child in her arms. "I saw the ambulance and was so worried. Are you both okay?" she asked, looking toward Tyray. He nodded but couldn't speak. There were no words to describe what he had witnessed, no way to explain the gift that Bones had just given them. An hour later, Lark's mom drove Tyray back to his house. Lark sat next to him in the back seat, whispering to him words that he had never heard before, words that gradually pulled him back from the horrors of the night and into the moment with her. "Thank you. You're the bravest person I ever met. I can't believe what you did for us." Lark's mother and Kyle had said the same thing, but Lark kept close to him, rubbing his back and holding his hand. Once she wiped a tear racing down his cheek, and he stared into her face. Her eyes shone with concern and gratitude, respect and appreciation. It was as if he had been trapped on some deserted island, and somehow, after everything, she had now come to rescue him. He couldn't help but notice the mysterious mark where she had been hurt long ago. Despite whatever damage had been done, Lark had remained honest and gentle and true. It was all new to him, treasures he had never seen before. "You need to talk to me," she urged at a red light near his house. "I need to know what's going on in there." "You don't even want to know," he mumbled. "No, Tyray, I do," she replied, touching the cast where she had written. "Don't you get it? I do." Tyray closed his eyes and leaned into her. He felt the warmth of her body against his. Hot tears rolled down his face, streams of pain and sorrow that seemed to know no end. He couldn't talk now. It was all too much, too soon. But for the first time in his memory, he realized that he had someone who wanted to hear what he had to say, someone who trusted and valued him, no matter what anyone else said. It was a new world waiting to be discovered. Thanks to Bones, he would be able to explore it with her. The man had bought him that chance. But what did that mean? Tyray didn't know. So much was wrong at home with his family. His brother was still in jail, and Londell was still out there. None of that had changed. Yet inside, after everything, he felt different somehow. He had pulled a kid off the streets, at least for now. He had helped a friend and stood up for what was right. The more he thought about it, the more he knew that Dad and Jamie and the others at Bluford were wrong about him. He had made mistakes, but he was a good person too. Because of Bones, he had avoided prison and death. He had also reconnected with Warren, something he knew he would do again. Maybe every Sunday from now on. And he had fulfilled his promise to Lark. Now what would happen with her? He had no idea. For an instant, he pictured them together at the movies, seeing moonlight as if they were just like anybody else, a normal couple. It was silly, but it made him grateful for the possibilities. Paths once invisible suddenly opened to him. Tyray could see them now. Bones had shown him that. "Make it count," Bones had said. "I will," Tyray answered him. It was a kind of promise, he realized, one he knew he had to keep. The next day, after a late-night talk that left his parents in stunned silence, Tyray Hobbs took the long ride back to Cliffside Prison. Only this time, he was in the back seat of his parents' car. They had decided to join him. Tyray couldn't believe it. Dad's jaw was tight, and Mom looked nervous as they got in the car together. There was still so much that needed to be said. Tyray could feel it like an invisible passenger sitting next to him. Yet their car kept moving forward. Soon the four of them would be together as a family for the first time in a year. It was a miracle. Tyray knew he had made it happen as he gazed out the window. Under the warm Sunday morning sun, the highway stretched out before them, full of twists and uncertainty. But for Tyray, it was grounded in something even stronger: hope.